Good morning to all the members and those joining us and presenting today to this morning's Interim Finance Committee. We will start our agenda with roll call. Ms. Kaufman, can you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Present.
Assemblyman Frierson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Gorla.
Here.
Assemblyman Hafen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Howdige.
Here.
Assemblywoman Levitt.
Here.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Here.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Here.
Assemblyman Roberts.
Here.
Assemblywoman Titus.
Here.
Assemblywoman Tolles.
Here.
Assemblyman Watts.
Here.
Vice Chair Carlton.
Here.
Senator Canizaro.
Here.
Senator Dennis.
Here.
Senator Don Derilu.
Here.
Senator Goycochea.
Here.
Myers representing teacher for a guest.
Senator Hammond.
Here.
Senator Settlemeyer.
Here.
Senator Harris.
Here.
Senator Severs-Gansert.
Here.
Chair Brooks.
Here. And we're all present, accounted for. And before we get started with the rest of the agenda, I just want to remind our members, please keep your camera on so that we know you're present, and keep your microphone muted unless you want to be recognized and are talking. And I'll try to keep an eye on the gallery, and I'm sure Vice Chair Carlton will help me out to make sure that we can see if anybody has any questions. And if you do, just please raise your hand, both virtually and on the screen if you could, and I'll make sure that I get you. And if I don't see you, feel free to raise your voice up so I can hear you. And we will get started with our second agenda item, and that's public comment. Because there is no physical location and we're doing this virtually, the public testimony will be presented by telephone or written comment. Because of time considerations, we're going to limit each individual commenter to 2 minutes, please. And all the comment and call-in information is on the agenda that was posted earlier this week. So we will get started with public comment. And broadcast team, if you could see if we have anyone on the phone.
Participate in public comment. Please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 330. Please unmute and you may begin.
Good morning. My name is Brian Rippett. I'm a 20-plus year chemistry and physics teacher from Douglas County. I'm currently serving as the president of the Nevada State Education Association, who has been the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years. NSEA is an affiliate of the National Education Association, the primary driver for federal investment in public education to address the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our schools. Leading up to the passage of the American Rescue Plan, our efforts help secure well over $1 billion for Nevada schools. Right now, school districts across the state are not fully able to meet the needs of their communities. We have bus routes without drivers, classrooms without highly qualified teachers, and other vacancies for critical school employees. When teachers are absent for medical reasons or require professional development, a substitute may not be available, further burdening an exhausted teaching corps that must fill the gaps. As of last December, Nevada reported over 1,200 teacher vacancies. A check yesterday of the Washoe County School District job site listed 166 open certified positions. The situation is not improving, and despite unprecedented resources available, there is very little in front of you today to address this crisis. Item E.10 on today's agenda provides $15.4 million for teacher recruitment and retention. This is a very small percentage of the overall ESSER funds available, and the specific projects presented are focused on expanding professional development. While some professional development is necessary, it must be both meaningful and wanted by the educator to be effective. Usually, the PD is not individualized. The PD adds more to the plate of the already overburdened teachers and sufficient time to plan, practice, and implement the learning is not provided? Do you really believe that it is a skills deficit or lack of enough to do prompting educators to leave the profession? The real factors pushing educators out of teaching, like low pay, overcrowding, and unrealistic workloads, are not addressed here. And I think my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rippett, and we'll see if we have another caller.
Caller with the last three digits, 523. Please unmute and you may begin.
Good morning, Chair Brooks, members of the committee. My name is Tom Clark. I am here on behalf of the Nevada Association of Health Plans, the private insurance companies here in the state. I want to address IFC item 36, which is under your agenda item E. This item would fund a contract to help prepare the state to study the effects of a public option as implemented by Senate Bill 420. The Board of Examiners approved contract requires stakeholder engagement, federal waiver application development, and actuarial support coordination from an entity with actuarial expertise. Under Senate Bill 420, the state's health plans would offer insurance under the public option. This makes us a key stakeholder in the development of the public option plan. Representatives from my association from the private insurers are eager to participate in the process and are vital to developing a solution that works for Nevada. Our members respectfully request that we are included in these key discussions with the state and other stakeholders to develop the scope of work for the forthcoming actuarial study. I can't stress how important it is that the most qualified consultant be selected to perform that work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Can we see if we have another caller?
Yes, Chair. Caller with the last three digits, 649. Please feel free to unmute and you may begin. Caller with the last three digits, 649. Please press *6 to unmute. And you are unmuted.
Good morning. My name is Patricia Farley. I'm the former state senator for Senate District 8. And good morning to some of my fellow colleagues from the legislature. I am calling in public comment regarding item 82, item 83, and 4, an attachment to item K that may be heard or discussed today. As well as being a former state senator, I am a licensed foster parent and an adoptive mother of two children who have seen and experienced the worst the world has to offer, very similarly to a lot of the children who are currently in our foster system. These kids are coming from drug homes, from massive abuse, from hunger, and our system isn't funded to take care of them. So specifically, I have used the community-based mobile crises. I have had a child in Desert Willows. I have been very thankful for the mobile crisis unit for the instant response to very serious emotional and mental health issues. However, extended care from there, being referred to somebody who is qualified or capable to continue long-term care for my children has been void here in the state of Nevada. And it's been an issue that has been underfunded for many legislatures, many a governor's office, and it's time we do something very different for these kids. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Farley. Can we please see if we have another caller?
Caller with the last three digits, 089. Please unmute and you may begin. Caller with the last three digits, 089. Please press *6 to unmute. You are unmuted.
Good morning. My name is Bobette Bond. I'm representing the Culinary Health Fund, which provides 120,000 Nevadans with comprehensive health care. I'm here to express our concerns about budget agenda item E, list E, item 36. Section 39 of SB 420, the public option, specifically requires an actuarial analysis of the impact of the bill prior to proceeding with the public option waiver. We ask this body to ensure that occurs and that all impacted segments of the healthcare system be considered in a robust evaluation to the public option on the existing healthcare system in Nevada. As SB 420 was introduced with 6 weeks left in the legislative session, many questions and concerns were raised. The bill was amended in ways that differ from testimony provided explaining it and our understanding of the legislation. The session was difficult, the bill is complicated, and time was short. One reason for us to speak here is our concern that this legislation specifically allows avoidance of steps usually in place to help provide transparency, such as the state purchasing requirements, as well as public meetings for regulation setting. 420 has the ability to fundamentally change the health system in Nevada. We're therefore concerned to see the agenda item on dispersing implementation funding when a clear understanding of the impact of the bill has not yet been established. We ask the process be established through a robust impact study as part of the actuarial analysis. We'd like to contribute. We'd like to work together to understand the impact on our coverage, on private coverage premiums, on collective bargaining, and on union health plans. We request any implementation of the waiver only after this has been done. Our fund, as well as the Health Services Coalition, which represents 24 additional funds, are available and interested in participation. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Bonds. Next caller, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 049. You are unmuted and may begin.
Good morning. My name is Patrick Kelly, and I'm the new CEO of the Nevada Hospital Association. On behalf of my 12-member hospitals who provide intensive care services to Nevada's babies, I'd like to make a request of the committee. Discussions have taken place regarding policy changes that effectively reduce reimbursement for NICU babies. Part of the discussions involves the legislative intent. The proposed policy change would substantially reduce the amount of money hospitals receive for providing NICU care. It is estimated that the 12 hospitals would see approximately a $29 million reduction. This reduction would effectively eliminate the 25% increase the legislature approved and appropriated in the 2019 session. We've had and continue to have conversations with DHCFP on this issue. These have been good meetings, and we look forward to more. In our meetings, legislative intent was cited. We would appreciate direction to your LCB staff to review the intent of the legislature in appropriating a 25% increase in NICU rates and reappropriating that increase in 2021. Was there an intention to have hospitals receive substantially less money for NICU services? We make this request because clarity on the appropriation could affect the policy changes that are likely to be approved at a November hearing. We appreciate your consideration of this request because NICU services are vital for frail babies and their families. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Next caller, please.
Caller with the last two digits, 837. You are unmuted and may begin.
Hello, this is Kent Irvin, K-E-N-T-E-R-V-I-N, for the Nevada Faculty Alliance, the independent association of faculty at Nevada's public colleges and universities. Because of the COVID pandemic, state workers were furloughed, our benefits were cut drastically, and our premiums were increased. $25 million was withdrawn from the Public Employees Benefits Program in FY 2021, and another $49 million was cut. Our constituents have heard about the $2.7 billion in state funds under the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, including the $1.1 billion in revenue loss funds transferred to the general fund. They also read that gaming revenues have recovered and reached all-time highs. State employees don't understand why no action has been taken on restoring the cuts to state employee benefits. Healthcare needs don't wait. ARPA revenue loss funds are explicitly intended to fill budget holes resulting from COVID. A major goal of the Every Nevadan Recovery Plan is addressing budget shortfalls. Although ARPA funds are one-time allocations, the pandemic budget crisis is also a one-time event, and the ARPA funds can be used through FY 2025 or FY 2026. Not addressing the budget cuts now means doing permanent harm to state programs. The LCB opinion in your packet shows the state has the authority to fix the budget cuts. The state got its $2.7 billion check over 4 months ago. The PEB board is deciding plan design for FY 2023 at its November meeting next month. PEB urgently needs ARPA funds to restore benefits and avoid further cuts for FY 2023. Why should state employees suffer for another year when all the $1.1 billion in revenue loss funds are being held in the general fund? Please act now to make whole the state employees who have served on the front lines. Of course, the same issues apply to the unrestored operating budgets for other state agencies, including higher education. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Irvin. Next caller, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 263. Please press *6 to unmute. Caller, you are unmuted.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jesse Wada. Here also today representing the Nevada Hospital Association, but specifically speaking on work program 36 under agenda item E. And in that, I would like to certainly endorse the comments of Mr. Clark and Ms. Bond, who went before me. Nevada's hospitals have been engaged with our coalition partners, the Nevada Association of Health Plans, the Nevada State, and the Nevada State Medical Association in working to provide you as policymakers meaningful Nevada-based feedback and perspective on the public option. With the funding of the contract in Work Program 36, the implementation process of the public option will begin. As part of those processes, a distinct actuarial review of the Nevada healthcare market will be starting. This is in anticipation of the CMS waiver process and the additional actuarial reviews to effectuate those. We look forward to participating in this stakeholder engagement process, developing the actuarial scope of work, and we will be submitting some questions for the actuary to you as policymakers to review in its overview of the healthcare market in Nevada from our Nevada-based perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wada. Could we please have the next caller?
Caller with the last 3 digits, 577. You are unmuted and may begin.
Good morning. This is Chris Bailey, Nevada State Education Association. Just following up on our President Bryan Rippett's comments earlier related to item E10 on today's agenda, which dedicates $15.4 million for teacher recruitment and retention, largely focused on expanding professional development opportunities. So it really is not a skills deficit or lack of enough to do that is prompting educators to leave the profession. The real factors pushing educators out of teaching, like low pay, overcrowding, and unrealistic workloads, are unfortunately not addressed adequately in this item. Meanwhile, when the legislature provided the opportunity to remove an item from teacher workloads this school year by passing AB 57 to temporarily pause the use of student learning goals, or SLGs, in teacher evaluations, the Nevada Department of Education issued a guidance memorandum encouraging districts to require teachers to do SLGs anyway. Most school districts, including Clark County and Carson City and others, deferred to NDE, and this limited opportunity to actually ease teacher workloads was unfortunately squandered. As we work our way through the COVID-19 pandemic, our schools and their operations continue to suffer. With resources at your disposal, we would hope Nevada would do more to make sure the job of educator is appropriately compensated. The workplace issues like class size, caseloads, overburdened professional responsibilities, and the valuing of educator voice and agency in their work are adequately addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Could we have our next caller, please?
If you have recently joined the call and would like to participate in public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 377. Please press *6 to unmute. You are unmuted and may begin.
Good morning. My name is Deshaun Jackson. I serve as the Director of Children's Safety and Welfare Policy with the Children's Advocacy Alliance. Recent reports have highlighted the urgent need to address the children's mental health crisis in Southern Nevada, which has only been exacerbated by the impacts of the pandemic. The Children's Advocacy Alliance fears that as families continue to battle the impacts of the pandemic while struggling to find mental health services for their children, many will find themselves voluntarily relinquishing their parental rights to a system not designed nor created to handle this particular crisis, just to receive mental health assistance for their child. We believe that we must act now and declare this crisis an emergency and utilize the funds necessary for the betterment of Nevada's children. As someone who has experienced Nevada's foster care system, as well as been a recipient of Nevada's mental health services, I believe that it's important to put services in the hands of families that need them and in the communities, to expand capacity where needed, and to really focus on where the state and where the county can partner in ensuring that all youth across the state receive adequate mental health services. As this has been an issue, not just within this past year, but has been an ongoing issue. And so looking at ways to build better relationships with community partners, as well as ensuring that youth that need the services receive those services. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Could we please have our next caller?
Caller with the last three digits, 653. You are unmuted. You may begin.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Chair and Vice Chair. My name is Dora Martinez. I represent the Nevada Disability Peer Action Coalition, and I have not yet got a chance to read the whole agenda, but I just want to take this opportunity and thank you all. And I think I heard Assemblyman Frierson, thank you so much for the bills that you passed regarding the voting bill. I have been going through the state educating people with disability on how to vote, especially AB 121. We do need that accessible voting. And I just want to thank you to Assemblywoman Carlton for being so awesome. Voc Rehab is on the ball right now with us, disabled folks. So thank you. And I hope you all enjoy the rainbow and happy Back to the Future Day, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez. Next caller, please.
Sir, the public line is open and working, but there are no more callers wishing to participate at this time.
All right, thank you. So we will
I'm
move
sorry,
on.
Chair, we had one more person hop on, if that's okay. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, no problem. Please go ahead.
Caller with the last three digits, 832, please press *6 to unmute. You are unmuted.
Thank you. Good morning. My name for the record is Terry Laird, spelled TerriLaird. I'm the Executive Director of the Retired Public Employees of Nevada, RPEN, a nonprofit, nonpartisan, membership-based organization. Formed in 1976, we currently represent nearly 8,000 dues-paying members. We know the work ahead for you is not easy due to the influx of requests from many state agencies and other groups across the state caused by the financial calamities created by the COVID pandemic. However, we ask you to give serious consideration to agenda item E80, dealing with the addition of $5 million in coronavirus aid, relief, and economic security CARES Act to the Public Employees Benefits Program, PEB, as the agency grapples with many COVID claims, along with those yet as unknown claims that could come. PEB sustained hefty budget cuts during the recent legislative session due to the huge budget shortfall created by the pandemic. As a result, it's led to increased out-of-pocket costs for participants, among them the elimination of long-term disability and other cuts again to life insurance for actives and retirees. RPEN works alongside other public employee advocacy groups, and we're all concerned about the impacts on the state, but even more concerned about increasing costs to PEB participants. Recruitment and retention is an ongoing problem for the state as they struggle to compete with other local and county governmental agencies who pay more and sometimes offer better benefits. We urge your approval of agenda item E80 and also hope going forward as the American Rescue Plan Act fund distribution discussions begin in earnest that you'll also keep PEB top of mind when distributing those funds as well. Thank you for your service and support of public employees in the state of Nevada.
Thank you, Ms. Laird. Do we have any other callers?
If you have not provided public comment and wish to participate, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. All right, Chair, it looks like this time there really are no more callers wishing to participate.
All right, thank you. So we can move on to our next agenda item, which is agenda item C, the approval of the minutes of December 18th, 2020 meeting. And I would like to see if any of the members have reviewed the documents and have any edits to the minutes that they would suggest. All right, I see none, so I would take a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second. I have a motion from Vice Chair Carlton and a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on that motion? I see no discussion, so we are going to do on our roll call today, or when we vote on items, we'll raise our hands in the affirmative, or if you oppose the item, and that way we don't have to go through a roll call individual members on the screen. So all in favor of the item, please raise your hands. And any against the item? All right, it appears as if that item passes unanimously, and we can move on to the next item. And the next item is agenda item D, and that is our expeditious 15-day work programs. Mr. Thorley, could you list the items from list D, list E, and list K that have been identified for discussion? And also, after Mr. Thorley does that, I'll pull the members here and see if they have any other items that we'd like to add to that list. Mr. Thorley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. On list D, which is the 12 work programs that were certified by the governor's office to be require expeditious action within 15 days. There are no items on that list that have been identified for additional discussion. The 15-day period for all 12 of these work programs has expired. So these are all informational items only. No action is required. On to list E, approval of gifts, grants, work program revisions, and position changes in accordance with Chapter 353 of NRS. Items E1 and E4 will be heard together and have been identified to have a discussion. Moving on to page 2 of list E, items E7 through E16. So all the items on page 2 and page 3 of list E, again, that's E7 through E16, have been identified to be pulled for discussion, and they all relate, they're all from the Department of Education and will be heard jointly. Moving on to page 4 of list E, item E22 has been identified to be pulled for discussion. Again, that's E22. On page 5 of list E, I would note it's on the list, but would note for the committee's awareness that E27 was withdrawn from the work program list. It was resubmitted by the governor's finance office as an action item and does appear on the agenda today as item H1 on the agenda. So E27 on list E was withdrawn and then resubmitted, and it's included on a different place on the agenda. Moving on to page 6 of list E, items E31 and E32 were both withdrawn by the governor's finance office after the agenda had been posted. So there's no note on the list that they've been withdrawn, but both E31 and E32 have been withdrawn. Next, on page 7 of list E, item E34 has been identified to be pulled for additional discussion, as well as E36. I would also note for the committee's awareness on page 7, again, this is noted on the list, but E35 and E37 were withdrawn. Next, on page 9 of list E, item E45 has been identified to be pulled for discussion. Again, that's E45. The next items are on page 12 of list E. E62, E62 and E63 have both been identified to be pulled for additional discussion. So again, that's E62 and E63. Then on page 13, item E65 has been identified to be pulled for additional discussion. And those are all the items from list E. Moving on to list K, which is the informational items list. Item K1B, Office of Project Management, Smart 21, has been identified to be pulled for discussion. Then on page 2 of list K, at the bottom of the page, items K11 and K12 have both been identified to be pulled for discussion. And those are all the items on list K. So again, it's K1B, K11, and K12. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Thorley. So now, do we have any of the members that have other items that they would like to be addressed? I know Vice Chair Carlton, you did. If you'd like to share those with us.
And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to have a conversation about E83 and 84. They're the same item, one for Northern Nevada and one for Southern Nevada. Most teams, I'd like those to be pulled and have further discussion. Just a few questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Do we have any other members who have any other items that they would like to be pulled for review? All right. I don't think I see any. So we can move on then, and we can go into agenda item E, approval of gift grants and work programs, revisions and position changes. And our first one that we will be getting into, and for those agencies and folks that were here today to help present those, we've now identified all of the items that we will be discussing. And so if you're not on that list, you're off the hook and can continue about your day. But we will now move on to our first item.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
would you like the committee to take a vote on the items that weren't pulled for discussion?
Thank you for reminding me of that. We do need to approve those items before we move on to the ones for discussion. So I would take a motion to approve the items on list E, or list E that are not being pulled for discussion.
So moved.
I think I have Vice Chair Carlton. I see him making the motion. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I have a lot of pictures on my screen here. Apologies. And
Okay.
A second from Senator Dennis. All right, thank you so much. And so all in favor, any discussion on that motion? All right, I see no discussion on the motion, so all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, any opposed? Motion passes unanimously, and we can then move on to listening to discussing items E. I think we're going to start with item E 1 and 4 together. And that is from the Office of the Governor, Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology, as well as Office of the Attorney General, state settlements. And today we have with us, and please bear with me as I juggle documents. My apologies, I have just too many screens up.
Mr. Chairman, if I could interrupt for just a moment. I'm having some trouble hearing, so I'm not sure if it's the microphones or whatever, but if I would request folks to speak up. For some reason, the volume seems very low. Maybe broadcast can try to address that for us. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I have, I can hear on my end really well, and hopefully y'all can hear me. But if broadcast wants to take a look at that. We have with us, we have Bryan Mitchell, the director of OSIT, the Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology. And we also have Jessica Dare, who's the Chief of Staff for the Attorney General's Office. And I think she's joined by Jessica Hogan in the Attorney General's Office as well. And so we can go ahead with Mr. Mitchell.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Bryan Mitchell, Director of the Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology, for the record. This work program would transfer $10 million from the T-Mobile Settlement Fund to OSIT for the purpose of providing funding to assist and enhance the connectivity of Nevada's Native American tribes. This is very exciting funding for us, and we know that there's a lot of need throughout our Native American communities. OSIT has a great relationship with tribes and colonies across the state, and we also work very closely with the Nevada Indian Commission, our fellow executive branch agency, as well as the Intertribal Council of Nevada, to identify needs, prioritize those needs, and then create and determine which projects should be funded. And I am happy to answer any questions that the Interim Finance Committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Maybe we can hear from Ms. Adair first and taking these kind of issues together, and then we'll go to the committee for questions.
Thank you, Chair. Jessica Adair for the record. And as you noted, I am joined today by our Chief Financial Officer, Jessica Hogan, on the line. So this is a really exciting settlement for our office. This is a result of the T-Mobile AT&T merger. The settlement agreement does a variety of things that are not before you today, right, including requiring T-Mobile to keep Nevada jobs in Nevada, to develop low-cost data plans for Nevada consumers, to expand 5G across the state. But it also included a $30 million charitable contribution to the state. So this $10 million is just the first tranche of that funding. The funding has to be used in one of three ways, and using the funding to prepay or reimburse investments in broadband technology in Nevada's Native American tribes is one of those three approved uses. When we reached out to OSIT, GOED, and the Office of Workforce Innovation to discuss how we could use this future funding, OSIT jumped right on it. They had a list of shovel-ready projects that was really exciting to work with them. I want to thank them on the record for continuing to work with our office to identify the best uses of this funding. Since that agreement, I'm anticipating we might get some questions about how this funding is going to interact with potential federal funding. And I want to thank OSIT for really thinking strategically about how we can use this funding to match future hopeful investments of federal dollars, so we really get the best bang for our buck in expanding broadband technology across the state. And I am happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Adair. We have, I believe we have 4 folks queued up to ask some questions, and I might have some myself if I don't hear some information from theirs. And I think we'll start with Senator Dondero Liu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this information from the Attorney General's office. I know you covered a little bit of this, and I'm thrilled to hear that there isn't an expiration date, but can you tell me how the 20 million, the remaining 20 million will be allocated among those various purposes outlined in that settlement agreement, and just kind of give me some more information on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jessica Adair, for the record. That is a great question. So we are just now in a place where we're going to get that second tranche of funding. And we look forward to working with the Office of Workforce Innovation to use that funding to promote workforce development, and with GOED and that funding has to be used to enhance entrepreneurial opportunity and expand small businesses in Nevada, specifically those owned by women and people of color. When we first approached Owen and GOED, they were very excited about the prospect of this funding. But shortly thereafter, we had a bit of a pandemic, and our workforce development looks a little bit different now. So what we're hoping to do is work with those agencies in the future to figure out how do we strategically match this funding with what we hope will be future federal funding and potentially ARPA money that is dedicated to workforce development and economic development for small businesses. I wish I could give you more specific details, but I would like to have more concrete discussions with those agencies before we make specific commitments on the record about how that funding will be used.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. And next up, I think I have Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you very much, Chair. I had a quick question regarding how the T-Mobile settlement funds will be prioritized in relation to the federal funds that may be awarded for the tribal broadband improvements.
Thank you for the question, Bryan Mitchell, Director of OSIT, for the record. OSIT has responsibility for assisting the tribes apply for the various competitive federal funding programs. There was the most recent or the first tribal broadband grant was administered by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, or NTIA. The NTIA had $980 million available to grant out, and we assisted 15 tribes apply for $72 million of that $980 million. Subsequent to that, we learned that the NTIA had received over $5 billion in requests for the $980 million fund. Therefore, on a recent call with NTIA senior leadership, we understand that they will be making funding decisions at the end of November. And at that point, we will take stock of which of our grants were funded and how much. It's possible that some of our grants or our grant requests were not funded at all. And it's also possible that other grant requests may be funded in part. and therefore we'll take a look at what the status of our funding requests are and whether supplemental funding would be necessary in order to completely build out the projects that we've outlined for those 15 tribes. Separately from that, 12 of Nevada's tribes did not apply for any NTIA funding but have significant needs within their tribes for connectivity. And we're currently working with the Nevada Indian Commission and the Intertribal Council of Nevada to reach out to those tribes and make them aware of different federal funding opportunities as well as state funding opportunities and offer assistance in identifying needs and developing project plans.
Thank you very much. You actually answered a second question I had, which was regarding the 15 tribes out of the 27. So just so that I understand, it was because those 15 tribes had actually applied, the others had not. So that's how the criteria was determined with those, and you're reaching out to the others.
Correct. Bryan Mitchell for the record. Ultimately, we want all of our tribes to apply for funding and receive as much money as we can and increase their broadband connectivity as much as possible. But with the pandemic, some of the tribes have other things on their plates and weren't able to apply for this last round. So we're continuing to do a lot of outreach to every tribe in order to ensure that they're aware of the opportunity and know that we're here to assist them.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Senator Dennis, do you still have a question as well?
Thank you. And I think part of mine was just answered, but you had a detailed plan on how you're going to spend the $10 million of the settlement. And now you've got this federal money that's available for the tribes. So that's kind of upended your plan. So I guess I'm in absence of that plan that you originally had, how you're going to expend that? I mean, what's going to be your specific plan to be able to do that now? You kind of talked a little bit about this just now, but can you address that maybe a little bit more detail, how we're going to get to a detailed expenditure plan?
Thank you, Senator Dennis, for the question. Bryan Mitchell for the record, and good to see you. The funding that we would plan to use these $10 million for can fit into three basic buckets. The first is residential, commercial, government, and whole community connectivity. So that would include last mile infrastructure development and for residential, commercial, or government buildings or community anchor institutions like senior centers, libraries, et cetera. There's also opportunities to use some of the funding for affordability programming, as we know that even if we put fiber drops in front of everyone's home, if folks aren't able to afford internet service, then they're still unconnected. The final category within this bucket would be digital literacy, inclusion, and equity programs. So this would be helping tribal members to learn how to use the internet effectively, how to stay safe online, and also how to access county and city and tribal services online, especially in the event that there's a flare-up in the pandemic. We'll also work with tribes to connect schools and libraries with both the connections to the buildings as well as connections within the buildings. And then finally, telemedicine has been identified as a big priority in Indian country. And given that many tribal lands are far away from large medical facilities, we feel like telemedicine would be a great opportunity to increase overall health. So those were some of the things that we identified prior to the pandemic, and certainly everything that I just said is true. What ultimately will happen is, we need to reevaluate what needs still exist within the 15 tribes after they've received their federal funding, and then also engage with the 12 tribes that didn't apply, and so all of the funding for the T-Mobile will fit into one of those categories.
So, just so I'm clear, with the federal funds, you're no longer going to need to be able to use the settlement funds to fill some of those gaps. And are you saying that there's going to be other things that the federal funds won't cover? And and then you'll be able to use the T-Mobile monies to be able to do that?
Correct, Senator Dennis. Bryan Mitchell, Director of OSIT for the record. There will be certain needs that the tribes have that are not eligible expenses with the federal funds. And so we'll be able to use the settlement funds to cover those needs. Separately, if a federal grant only covers 75% of the tribal ask in their grant application, then we'll be able to use some of the T-Mobile settlement funds to backfill unfunded aspects of the grant applications.
So what is the, what was the question I was going to ask? I'm just trying to understand. So when do you anticipate that you'll have a specific plan on what you're going to do, on who's going to get? You have to wait for all the federal grants to be done before we can understand what's going to happen with that 10 million?
Bryan Mitchell for the record. We anticipate understanding or receiving word on the federal grants by the end of November or the beginning of December. And so at that point, it'll take us some time to work with each of the tribes that either received a partial award or did not receive an award to determine what their gaps are. Separately, we need to continue to do outreach to some of the 12 tribes that didn't apply. Some of these tribes are a bit hard to get a hold of, and so I can't give you an exact date on when we'll have all of the funding spent. It'll take a lot of outreach and a lot of collaboration with our tribal partners to be able to put together specific plans. However, what I can say is that what I outlined earlier is kind of the universe of expenses or the universe of things that we would fund with the T-Mobile settlement money.
So I understand you can't tell, you're not going to know when it's all going to be expended, but at what point are you going to have the actual amounts and how you're going to spend those? Do you have like a ballpark? How long is it going to take to? You mentioned that the end of November, beginning of December, you'll know if they got grants. Is that correct? And then how long is it going to take after that to then sit down and say, this is what we're going to do with that? Now that we know how much is going to go to the federal grants, how we're going to spend the other part.
Bryan Mitchell for the record. I hope as soon as possible. We would hope to be able to make contact with the remaining tribes in the spring. But we're doing outreach right now, and so I would hope that we would have specific plans for these funds no later than summer of 2022.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. And I have some questions. I have Assemblywoman Titus and then Vice Chair Carlton after that. Assemblywoman Titus, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question, and thank you for all this information. It's good. I know that the tribes and much of Nevada do not have enough broadband, and it's not just the tribes. It's urban areas and it's rural areas, and if it's nothing that we've learned from this pandemic, we learned that when the kids were all sent home, they didn't either have their Chromebooks or they were sent home with a Chromebook or a computer, but then no connectivity within their own home to then get back onto the school. And so I'm just wondering about how you're going to monitor the success of this money that you are putting out there. We've heard horror stories of rooms full of computers and nobody ever takes them out of the boxes. And how do you monitor success when we're looking at spending this kind of money? And I would use the example that 12 out of the 27 tribes identified haven't applied, but there may be reasons for that. And how are you actually reaching out? Are you going out to those tribes? Perhaps they, the deadliest words in the language are, we're from the government, we're here to help. They may not want that. And so how do you measure, what are your plans for measuring the success of this money and this expenditure? I mean, making sure that the telemedicine folks that do have access, because that's good, it's good stuff that you intend to do. But I always worry that we're putting this money out there. What's your follow-up plans? How do you measure success?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Titus, for the question. Bryan Mitchell for the record. I think lucky for us, it's actually fairly easy to measure success when it comes to broadband, and a few of the measures of success that we will use is the difference in connectivity speeds prior to the expenditure of funds and subsequent to the expenditure of funds. So we can measure the how fast the internet connections were before and then after. Second measure of success would be the number of connected buildings, particularly to fiber infrastructure. And so if there's schools, libraries, tribal administration buildings, the tribal smoke shop, et cetera, all of those, connecting all of those buildings to a redundant, resilient, scalable, and affordable connection will be one of the measures of success. Third measure of success would be the number of tribal members who report having an internet connection at home. We have data from the American Community Survey that indicates how many members in these communities have internet connections now. And between providing better broadband infrastructure and also affordability and digital literacy programs, we want to see that number increase substantially. So that's, Assemblywoman, how we would measure success.
Assemblywoman, if I may follow up briefly to that question, Jessica Adair, for the record, you identified some really important key points that this funding does not necessarily address, but are part of the larger AT&T T-Mobile settlement agreement that also requires T-Mobile to report to the AG's office on a regular basis. And those reports are court enforceable. And some of those items include within 6 years of the close of the merger that T-Mobile deploy a 5G network that will cover 94% of Nevada's general population and 83% of Nevada's rural population. And also for 6 years provide a low cost mobile data program. So that in and of itself, we also feel is really important to expanding internet access and telecom access across the state of Nevada. However, it is something that T-Mobile is doing unilaterally that does not implicate the $30 million contribution. So that's why it's not part of this particular work program. But it is important value to us and something that I wanted to make sure was on the record.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. I have next Vice Chair Carlton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess I'm going to go to Ms. Adair first because I'm trying to figure out the three pots of money as she's described it a bit earlier. So we've got these three particular issues: workforce, economic development, and then the broadband issue. And I guess my ultimate question is the broadband issue only for the tribes, or are we going to address other broadband issues in the state? If some of these federal dollars, I heard there's not going to be any duplication. So I think we're waiting to make sure that the highest and best use of each dollar gets where it needs to be. But if the tribes do end up getting more federal dollars and there are dollars left in the T-Mobile settlement, those dollars can be used for other broadband issues in the state. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Carlton. Jessica Adair, for the record, no. For this particular tranche of funding, or for this charitable commitment, the broadband funding must be used for Native American tribes. That being said, there are other parts of the agreement that require T-Mobile to invest in broadband connectivity access for the larger state of Nevada, but it's just not part of the charitable contribution. So T-Mobile is required to expand broadband access to all of Nevada as laid out in the settlement agreement, but it does not require T-Mobile to make a direct monetary contribution to the state. The monetary contribution could only be used for Native American broadband, workforce development, and economic development. So you won't see that in a work program, but it is part of the larger global settlement agreement that T-Mobile continued to invest in broadband access for all of Nevada.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could ask Ms. Adair if she could expand on that global agreement and what the timeframes might be. And Ms. Adair, I'm always real frank and honest with you guys. we had kids sitting on the sidewalk next to a school bus so they could have a hotspot in East Las Vegas and in West Las Vegas and some areas where there is, we're not talking fiber, there's no internet at all. So I'd like to know, where does that discussion fit in with this? Yes, we want to see it out in the rurals, and we're very happy the tribes are going to get there. We've talked about making sure we had broadband for the tribes for as long as I can remember. But I also want to make sure that, you know, we don't have kids sitting on the sidewalk next to a bus so that they could have internet connectivity so that they can do their homework.
Jessica Adair, for the record, I'm really glad you asked that question because this is another great thing that I'd like to talk about on the record. So as part of the settlement agreement, T-Mobile promised to include Nevada in its nationwide broadband internet access program specifically for school-age children. Because of the pandemic, they sped that process up. And T-Mobile worked directly with our office and Nevada's Department of Education to provide those hotspots when they started seeing this becoming a problem. So T-Mobile, ahead of schedule, distributed, I wish I had the number, I don't off the top of my head, but I can get it to you, hotspots to Nevada's children so they could attend virtual school throughout the pandemic. And it was not something that we anticipated to be part of the agreement when we made the settlement agreement, but it was sped up so that Nevada's children could attend school during the pandemic.
Madam Vice Chair, I can provide some additional details.
And if I could complete my question, thank you. Hotspots are one thing, but actual hardwire is another. So I'm still hoping that eventually these neighborhoods will get the resources that they need. So thank you very much.
Mr. Mitchell, were you going to add to that?
I can, yes, Bryan Mitchell for the record. And I think Vice Chair Carlton brings up a really excellent point. It was just building on what Ms. Adair said, it was 18,064 hotspots that T-Mobile provided during the pandemic last year. But you're absolutely right that hotspots are a temporary solution and one that is, and we need more permanent solutions. Therefore, OSIT has begun working with broadband action teams in every county throughout the state. And just earlier this week, we had meetings with staff from the cities of North Las Vegas, Henderson, and Clark County to discuss specifically the broadband issue and broadband connectivity, particularly in low-income communities. One of the problems that we have in Nevada is that there's been historically underinvestment in infrastructure in low-income communities in urban areas. And oftentimes when people think about the poor broadband connectivity, the mind turns very easily to rural areas. However, from what we see in terms of infrastructure and internet speeds, the speeds in areas of places like the historic west side of Las Vegas and North Las Vegas and the medical district have copper infrastructure that is, 40 or 50 or 60 years old. And some of the networking equipment belongs in the Internet Museum in San Jose. And so we are working together with these communities to examine the different federal funding opportunities for broadband to specifically invest and target investment in low-income areas and urban areas. And along with that, we're planning to work with providers to on accountability agreements where the providers would be required to not only invest in our low-income and underserved and unserved communities in urban areas, but also agree to certain reliability standards and different service standards that are present in either business arrangements or in our hiring communities. So we'll be able to share more later once those plans come to fruition, but I wanted you to know that we are specifically focusing on those areas.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. And do we have any other questions from any of the members on this particular item? Senator Gopichia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm just going to kind of reinforce what we've been hearing. You've hit it on the head clearly in the agenda item. Number one, the lack of broadband infrastructure, both to and within. Again, this $30 million, you can't get to Ivapa or Duckwater or even South Fork and get fiber in the ground. So let's be honest. When you get out in the rurals, there's a huge lack of fiber in the ground. I'm hoping the federal funds do pick it up, and this will be, but I'm sorry, just a very small Band-Aid. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And just want to remind everyone that this is a settlement with an organization that provides cellular service, and cellular expanding their 5G network would provide a cellular broadband solution in places where fiber can't go or is not cost effective to go. And it also augments with the federal funds. And it's limited to tribal lands per the settlement and the charitable. It's laid out in the agreement. And so I agree with Senator Gochia and with Assemblywoman Carlton about our urban areas lacking broadband, and there's a lot of our rural areas lacking broadband and the expense that it takes to get those things. But this is a great step in that direction. Senator Gochia, did you want to follow up?
Yes, I just wanted to comment. I live out on rural, cell service, and it's sometimes very lacking, let alone trying to run a computer on it. And I do thank the state; they did make a hotspot available to me during session. Otherwise, you can get out there and no connection. So thank you.
Thank you, sir, and Senator. And do we have any other comments from anyone else or questions? All right. So based upon that, I would be, I'd like to get a motion to approve the transfer of the $10 million in T-Mobile settlement funds to the Governor's Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology to support this particular broadband infrastructure improvements for Native American tribes, as was requested in the work programs that were submitted to us.
So moved.
Okay.
All right, who made that motion? Oh, Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson made the motion. Do I have a second?
Mm-hmm.
I have Senator Dennis. Do we have any discussion on the motion? All right, I see none. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. And any opposed, please raise your hand. And the motion passes unanimously. And we can move on to the next items that we pulled for discussion. And that would be, and I just want to thank you, Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Adair and Ms. Hogan for standing by in case we needed you today on this great agenda item that we just heard and passed. And so that'll move us to our next item. And our next items are going to be items 7 through 16. And they are all from the Department of Education. They all are related to COVID-19 funding. And so we will take those all together, and we will have an entire team to help us with that, to present those this morning. We have Superintendent Ebert. We also have Deputy Superintendent Hartz, and we have Deputy Superintendent Moore, Deputy Superintendent Gonzalez, and we have Chief Strategy Officer Todman. And so we can kick off with those items now with Superintendent Ebert. Please go ahead and welcome this morning.
Great. Good morning, Chair Brooks, Vice Chair Carlton, and members of the Legislative Interim Committee on Finance. For the record, my name is Joan Ebert, and I am honored to serve as the State Superintendent for Public Instruction. The Nevada Department of Education has submitted work programs for your hopeful approval this morning to aid Nevada's schools, students, and educators in COVID-19 recovery. Before I briefly summarize some of these work programs for today, I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart your leadership thus far in providing and getting the funding out to our school districts for use with our children has been phenomenal. The state legislature leadership in response to COVID-19, we know began almost a year ago with a special session 2020. It continued through the legislative session 2021 and is evidenced now in the interim. And this includes your response to our constituents and decision-making as you move forward. Among our advances in getting the federal aid out to our students and educators, I do know we're going to do a report next time you meet in December, but I do want to let you know that it was just 3 weeks ago today that we launched the Donors Choose program. We have 5,000 projects that have already been submitted and approved. And thousands of teachers have expressed gratitude for the tools and resources that they are provided in their classrooms. And you have the link to be able to see the great work that they're doing. And again, I want to thank you for that approval. Additionally, the $20 million that was made available for stipends for higher education, getting that teacher pipeline, the internships, the coursework, preparation for Nevadans for college and career success. We already have for this semester 200 students, higher education students that received assistance for their tuition, as well as for their student practicum, and then 700 students that received tuition reimbursements. And that's this semester. We expect more in the spring. That's traditionally when a lot of students do their student teaching. The work programs that you have before you today, we really bucketed around 4 main areas for our recovery and renewal. They are the teacher recruitment and retention, advancing equity, social emotional learning and mental health, and efficiencies for long-term success. These work programs align with the federal expectations for evidence-based programs, as well as our shared priorities as a state as a whole. These work programs use federal aid in a way that not only helps students and educators recover from any interruptions in learning caused by the pandemic, but it propels our state forward. Feedback from all of our listening tours and sessions made it clear that prioritizing the recruitment and retention of educators was paramount for student success. And any success in learning during COVID-19 can be traced back directly to the dedication of our talented teachers who have gone above and beyond to support our students and families. In the work program for teacher recruitment and retention, we not only are supporting the immediate recovery needs with our educators, but are thinking strategically about filling the teacher vacancies, which has been a recurring problem in our state. This is not a new problem, but this year we started with a larger gap than we've ever started with before. And so closing that gap is crucial. Our work program for advancing equity aims to close longstanding opportunity gaps that led to achievement gaps, especially as it relates to college and career readiness. You will see that we have an Algebra 1 project in there. If students do not pass Algebra 1 courses, their chances of graduating and success diminishes extremely. We have literacy, we have supports for English language learners. We also have Native American learners in there and school improvement. And this work program is reflective of our needs as a state. And it was highly amplified during our listening sessions. Our most cited response from stakeholders regarding how we use the federal funds was social emotional supports for both our students and our educators. So our work program responds to those needs as well by investing in trauma-informed restorative practices, multi-tiered systems of support, and suicide prevention training. Finally, our investments in long-term efficiencies will create a more responsive and nimble education system, which ultimately supports our students, educators, and families. Those projects include enhancements for our desktop monitoring to reduce the burdens on our school districts so they can get to the work of educating our children, and aligning the data systems to include our youngest learners, beginning with our pre-K system. NDE is charged with administering and monitoring the largest federal relief package in our nation's history. For Nevada, this is totaling over $1.5 billion. 90% of that, which went directly to the school districts. Upon your approval, they'll receive the last third. And we need to ensure that our students have those high quality learning opportunities. Our districts and schools receive those resources and use them effectively. With the proposed new systems and efficiencies in place, our principals can focus on being the instructional leader of a school, and our districts can focus on supporting principals with school improvement. I'd like to close by thanking the Interim Finance Committee again for your leadership regarding the federal relief funds. This is a critical investment, as you know, not only in our immediate needs, but also in the long-term recovery and renewal. These are conscious decisions to propel our state forward in educator recruitment and retention, student achievement, meeting the social and emotional needs of both students and educators, and equitable outcomes for all of our students. So thank you again. The entire team is here because the entire team worked on all of this across our state. So we stand ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Superintendent Ebert. And I'm particularly excited to hear about the Algebra 1 program. That's a huge hurdle for a lot of folks that enter into the electrical apprenticeship program, where I used to be an instructor in the industry that I work in. So that's one very clear way to help with a path towards a long-term meaningful career. So I appreciate seeing that on the list. We have a handful of questions. I think I'll start with, I believe Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno had a question, and then I have Assemblyman Levitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have a few questions, if that's okay. I'd like to start, and thank you, Ms. Ebert, for the presentation. It's always good to see you. I have just a few questions. Could you give us an overview when you look at item 7 and 8? Could you give us an overview of how the emergency assistance to the non-public schools funding is going to be awarded by the department? And what's the anticipated or projected timeline to do that? And then I have another question.
Good morning, Jonathan Moore for the record. Thank you for the question. We have been working diligently with our partners, both in state purchasing and the Office of the Attorney General, to navigate state processes for administering the EANS funding. Currently, what has transpired is that we've had the Office of the Attorney General review joinder agreements for us to provide services to our non-public schools. When it comes to EANS funding, we're not able to directly sub-award funds to non-public schools or non-public schools like we do our traditional public schools. So as a result, we contract with vendors who then provide those services. We anticipate that those joinder contracts will be finalized by December 1st. At which point we can then prepare an application for non-public schools that takes into consideration factors like enrollment, students experiencing economic hardships, as well as impact to COVID. It's also important to note that as it relates to our ARP-EANS application, we are currently awaiting approval by the federal government as well. So that is also a consideration for us to administer those funds.
Thank you for that answer. I appreciate it. As I was going through all of our notes and looking at today's agenda and all of the work programs from you all, I know that during the listening tours and talking to educators, principals, and students, as we've all been doing throughout the state, there was one item that was brought up again and again, and I didn't see it in the work programs, and I'd just like to know what you're doing about it. When we talk about helping low-income students, homeless students, and especially teacher retention and recruitment, I didn't see anything specifically for African-American teachers and especially Black male teachers. I heard that time and time again from our principals and from educators during the tours that they are having a hard time retaining the teachers that we have, but also recruiting, and especially African-American male teachers. Can you tell me, do you have a program that you're going to bring to us later? What are you doing with that concern? Because it did come up time and time again on the listening tours that I attended.
Superintendent Ebert for the record, and then I'll turn to Deputy Gonzalez as well. So there are projects that are moving forward. You are correct, Assemblywoman. There's not a specific project at the state level. What we've been doing is coordinating with the school districts to make sure that we expend these funds efficiently and effectively. I will tell you that within the Clark County School District, specifically, they've been working with, oh my goodness, and then it's leaving my head. I apologize. I'll have to circle it back. But specifically for the recruitment of African-American Black males, as well as a diverse population. So that specific that you're getting at, you will see within the school districts and that 90% that I spoke to. In the work program with our recruitment and retention, you will see that the funds are made available for finishing out for the student teaching. We know that, and also too with what you passed with Senate Bill 354 during the legislative session with our paraprofessionals. We know that there are people that would like to join the education workforce, mainly Black and Brown, finishing that college degree, and then also finding the resources to be able to participate in the student teaching. That is a full-time job. You can't be a student teacher without being there in the classroom all day. And so those funds are strategically being used across the state based on need. And so we know that the students of color in our higher education system are the ones in need, and we expect to grow the pipeline in that way. So those words that you use aren't specifically in that program, but I would like to say they are intentional in how we're moving forward, and they are targeted. Deputy Gonzalez, I see you would like to jump in.
Thank you, Felicia Gonzalez, for the record. So we do have a few items in here today that also are focusing on diversity. But prior to this, you did approve $20 million for the incentivizing teacher pathways, which does support diversity in the application process to get more diverse teachers and then eventually leaders into our system. We also have a teaching and training CTE program for rural and urban expansion. And as you will see, the focus is not only on our rural, where there are currently no CTE teaching and training programs, but they are focused on 3 large urban high schools that are in Clark County, with the intention of starting that recruitment very early on and focused on diversity. And once again, as Superintendent Ebert shared with you, we are focused on the paraprofessional pipeline to get them to become teachers, and this is where we find our most diversity. As you know, it is very hard nationally to find teachers, and so we are working and partnering with all of our higher education institutions to really focus in on our grow your own talent within our own state. And I will tell you that all of our colleges and universities are focused on that diverse pipeline, but not only that, but providing the needed supports so that our diverse candidates are successful.
Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Please do.
Thank you. And I appreciate what you are doing, and I appreciate the word diversity, but I'm going to say, when you say diversity, that includes everyone. in touring one of the schools that's not in my district and not in a traditional Black part of town, the principal in that school has the teachers of the hallway pictures up in their hallway so kids could see people that look like them. He had no Black male teachers to put the picture up in the hallway so his Black male students could see someone successful that looked like them. So he literally had to ask the janitors to put a suit on and take a picture so his Black male students could see someone that looked like them, so they know that they could attain some of their goals. As I travel in our rural communities, we talk about Clark County, and that's where a large number of African Americans live. But we have African Americans all over the state of Nevada, and I need Black male teachers all over the state of Nevada. We have Black males in our rural communities. So when we talk about diversity, I truly appreciate it, but I would really love to see the state do a more intentional drive in getting African American educators in our classrooms, especially Black men. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And so I've got a few other folks that want to go here. I've got Assemblyman Levitt, Assemblywoman Tolles, and Assemblywoman Miller. And so I'll go ahead with Assemblyman Levitt.
Thank you, Chairman Brooks. So a lot of my stuff was answered as far as teacher recruitment, retention, along with like student teaching and special program administrators. You know, the CTE expansion, which is perfect. I guess my question is more broad than that. So when we talk to principals and administrators there, during the COVID pandemic, they were struggling with these programs, you know, being able to have the funding to hire student teachers, hire people to run the special programs that are, I think, essential in a child's education beyond, you know, Algebra 1, which I'm not as excited about as a student, but excited for other students. So how close are we to filling in that gap that was created during the pandemic? Are we close? Are we not too close to filling in those gaps that were created?
Thank you, Assemblyman Levitt. For clarification, are you talking about the learning gap that was created during the pandemic, or are you talking about the staffing gap or something else? I apologize.
I think it's more in the lines of the staffing. As I talked to principals, they were fortunately had some money left over from the previous year to use towards hiring student teachers or people to run special programs. And so I wondered, you know, are we filling in the gap that was already existent, and how close are we to helping with that?
Yes, so thank you for the question, Assemblyman Levitt. When you look in item number 10 in the teacher recruitment and retention, specifically in there with let me back up. We have to be strategic and intentional, and it has to be a multi-pronged approach. And unfortunately, this is a national issue. This is my 32nd year in education. And when I started teaching mathematics at that point in time, I was actually offered additional funds if I would have stayed in California. I ended up in Nevada, and I'm here again. So that being said, it's not a new problem, especially in those high need content areas, mathematics, science, special education, ELL. We have not done, our profession, we've not done a great job in highlighting what a rewarding profession this is and encouraging a pathway for our students to see themselves as educators, to grow the next population. We have, as the United States, we have not done a good job, and we need to change that narrative. With that, so in the strategy behind this work program, you will see multi-tiered. Number one, if I were to start at the end of the pipeline, if you will, right now, in the CTE work program, we're actually building a CTE pathway. So not only do we have manufacturing, do we have culinary, all of the other programs, but now we will have a teaching and leading pathway, a CTE pathway. So that you will see in this program. There are schools within our state that have already started that, but we need to make sure we've been working collaboratively with higher education to help us get those programs started in every single high school in our state. Right now, we have about 26 of the roughly 100 high schools that have some sort of program. That program, even though there's about 4,000 students in those programs today, will not be realized for 8 years. So that's, starting that pipeline, getting the profession. In here, you will see a program which is called NV Epic. That is $6 million that we're looking at having cohorts of alternative route to licensure teachers, which we have several, that people that want to change professions, they want to join us as educators. So we'll be working with higher ed, UNR, UNLV, Nevada State College. We've met with all three of them to make sure that they're prepared to help build it out. So you have cohorts there, and then also to the paraprofessionals, which I mentioned earlier, Senate Bill 352, which passed last legislative session. Those staff members already want to be in a K-12 environment. They want to serve children. So how do we support them moving from the position that they're in within a school district into the classroom, moving forward, and or becoming a school psychologist and all of those requisite coursework that they need to be able to support. So building out that system here locally, but also working at the national stage is critical. And then, as I said earlier, the $20 million that you approved prior. So we're attacking this at many different levels and places to move our entire state forward. The here and now, you see school districts thinking differently about where their staff and how the staff is allocated. And that's important. We have monthly conversations with superintendents across the state on how to strategize both in our urban, rural, and suburban schools, because it is an issue statewide. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Assemblyman. Next up, I have Assemblywoman Tolles has a question.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair, and good to see you, Superintendent, and happy to see that we're getting some of these dollars out to the programs and the kids in need. So we passed legislation, and I brought this up in our subcommittee on the federal funds. We passed legislation to fund learning loss and literacy programs in particular, and I do see learning loss addressed in item number 12, and then I also see in item number 9, we have $322 million being allocated. Are either of those addressing the literacy piece in particular? And then I have one more question. Thanks.
Jonathan Moore for the record. Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Tolles. Literacy is an area that's near and dear to my heart, having taught literacy. One particular project among several, but one particular is our Science of Reading professional learning. So we're currently in the final stages of finalizing agreement with the University of Minnesota for statewide professional learning on the science of reading. As you know, in our Read by Grade 3 legislation, while we don't use the term science of reading, we outline the components of science of reading that our teachers should know and that we know are proven parts of the methodology for improving literacy, proficiency, comprehension, fluency, vocabulary, just to name a few. And so with this statewide professional learning opportunity, we'll be building cohorts of educators at no cost to them. They will go through a rigorous experience to improve their capacity. It's completely optional. We hope that all of our elementary teachers will take advantage as it is offered at no cost, but they will be able to improve their capacity to deliver effective literacy instruction. As a part of that particular proposal, we also worked with the University of Minnesota on a program evaluation. So we'll be able to ascertain data not only regarding teachers' perceptions of their ability to teach literacy effectively before engaging in a cohort experience and after, but we'll also be able to get a sense for localized outcomes as it relates to the participants. So we're very excited to propose this project.
So thank you for that. I guess I'd love to see the breakdown. I think it was 200 million for traditional public schools and then 15 million for charter schools, specifically for the learning loss and the literacy programs. Are we going to be able to see how we broke that down, how we've spent it, if we've spent it yet? Because as of our subcommittee, we had not yet approved and spent that money. And so I'm concerned that we still are holding on to it and not spending it, because we wanted to get kids ramped up early in the fall as soon as they came back from a year and a half of online learning. And you know, we're almost to getting close to the end of October. And so I guess I'd love to see more detail on specifically how much of that money we've spent, if any, already, and where we're spending it. Just maybe as a follow-up.
Yeah, thank you for that question statement. The 200 million that you're referring to that was allocated was to be allocated after the school district submitted their plans for the 1.5 billion that was allocated by the federal government. And so those funds were issued from the federal government back in March. We came to IFC. We had to follow also the US Department of Education requirements for the state plan to be submitted, and then also the school district plans to be submitted. The school district plans were submitted just last month. They needed, as a requirement for their plans, they needed to receive community input to develop their plans. And so working with the school districts, and that part of the efficiencies that we're asking for today in all of these work programs have a dashboard so that you and the public can see every single project that school districts are requesting and are funding. Because we want to be held accountable for these dollars. We want everyone to be able to see what is transpiring. But back to your initial question, that money has not been, the 200 million and the 15 has not been made available yet, because we had to do those other pieces first. Those funds will go out beyond the federal funds as well. So we'll be working next after these plans are approved and move forward on that set of funding as well. That being said, school districts have that in mind in what they're doing for the interrupted learning that has transpired during the pandemic.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly helpful. And so I appreciate that clarification. And Chair Brooks, if I could ask my second question on a different topic, I'll make it quick.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So looking at items 15 and 16, I see two different buckets where we support overtime incurred by Department of Ed staff, just specifically related to COVID. I wanted to, if I could just understand a little bit better what that overtime related to responding to COVID was, and if we're giving overtime to hourly employees, or is that overtime for salaried employees? I know it's kind of a technical question, but that just stood out to me as being interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. So salaried employees do not receive overtime. That being said, the other components of overtime that you'll see, I have three kind of main areas to share. Number one is back in June, IFC did approved the hiring of an education program supervisor to help oversee the $1.5 million and manage, project manage this work across our own agency as well as the school districts. We literally just received a candidate list this week. And so months have passed where we have not had that position made available to move those projects forward. With that being said, so that's one piece. The second piece is that the work is spread across the entire organization, the entire state. In some of our areas where we need additional support, we didn't need a whole FTE. We didn't even need a 0.5 of an FTE. We just need extra hours to complete that work that has been brought on, whether it's managing additional pieces within the federal grant and so on. And I guess in closing, the third piece is that it's important to note that the staff overtime needs are not exclusive to managing projects that have been approved or proposed just under these funds, but that any staff work related to the pandemic response and recovery is allowable within these relief funds. So that's what the request is.
Thank you for that clarification. And also thanks for the dashboard that you mentioned earlier. I'm excited about that. I think that that's something the public's been wanting for as long as I've been involved in this discussion, is just a better, clearer understanding of where the dollars go and what the programs are and what they do and how they correlate to performance and outcomes for our students. So just wanted to say thank you and I'm excited to see that in action.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And up next, I have Assemblywoman Miller, please.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. I have two questions, if I may, Chair.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. The first question is, and it would be around some of the items mentioned under E10 regarding the recruitment and retention of educators. And Superintendent, you mentioned earlier about the amount of students that were receiving stipends for student teaching, as well as tuition reimbursement and so forth. But yet I'm hearing from constituents and from Nevadans and college students that that's not necessarily the case. The challenge between them even being aware of these programs at their colleges, and then I'm hearing about struggles and challenges with the colleges accessing some of those funds. And so both of them, in both cases, it seems to be a challenge of bureaucracy. And so if you could please explain what is the process for students who are in student teaching in order to get that stipend, and what needs to be done to streamline this process or to make it actually a reality for our colleges and our students.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Miller, for that question. I guess that's no one, and I will make sure that Deputy Gonzalez, the institutions themselves have not shared directly with us that they are having issues. So I would love to have them reach out directly. I actually met with Dr. Pollard last week and also met with the provost as well as the provost from UNLV and UNR. So if there are things that they are sharing with you, please say, and what did Superintendent Ebert say when you explained that to her? So I would love to address their concerns. I need to tell you, I'm really proud of the work you just approved as a body, those funds this summer. We made them available. The team worked on the application. We worked with all the higher education institutions just in a very short period of time and short months. And we have over 700 students that are participating in those programs. So I think maybe the newness, because this is brand new, we expect the program to last 2 years. If people have not heard, we will double down on the amplification of getting the information out to those that we serve. But in just a few months from your approval to now having 700 students being able to participate and become educators, I would like to celebrate that.
So Superintendent, then are all of our colleges here in Nevada that have teaching programs? So you're saying that every single college is receiving this money right now?
I believe it is 8 institutions, Deputy Gonzalez, that are receiving those funds.
Alicia Gonzalez, for the record, all institutions that have student teachers here in Nevada, that also that includes others that are not as specifically here in Nevada, are eligible to receive these funds. And so just so that everyone is aware, the awards are out, and institutions can provide these funds to student teachers and request reimbursement. So this is the absolute first time that this went out, as Superintendent Ebert explained. And with everything, the first time there's approval funding, and then our agency had to establish contractual agreements, and so now that this is now in place, moving forward, each of the next 3 semesters, it will be streamlined moving forward. The funding that's going out is retroactive. So if some of these student teachers have already, or I think some of them are getting ready to complete their student teaching at the end of this month, it is retroactive, so that they can provide them that funding still.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Superintendent. And I will follow up because, again, that's in conflict with what is being shared with me on the ground about existing realities right now. And Chair, if I may ask my second question. My second question is in regards to, well, I guess many of the items, and I guess it's an overarching generalized question about all of these different programs and different items. Many of them seem that they will support the projects of the Department of Education and their partners and vendors. And the ones, a consistent agreement that, you know, Nevadans have is that they want to see as much the programming and support and services directly in the classrooms. And so, again, there's often the gap between what the educators and the parents and the students who are living these realities are. So specifically under items or agenda items E13 and E14, can you describe how those programs will be evaluated? How will the students be able to, their perception of these programs at work, how educators and parents will be able to describe the effectiveness of this? Is there an evaluation and accountability tool in place so that we actually can see and know the effectiveness of this? Because I'm also, as my colleagues mentioned too, what we hear from the desires of educators and community members, to make sure that those are actually, that all of them are included and actually delivered in a way that we see the impact.
All right, so with the first part of your statement, what I would add is that to remind the entire public that is listening is that 90%, what we are presenting to you today or throughout multiple, meetings is only 10% of the entire allocation. So those real specifics and lift and shift is not coming to IFC, it's going to the school boards themselves locally. So that 90% in that piece. For the programs, you mentioned 13 and 14, all of the social emotional learning and support, as well as the early childhood, we do have school climate surveys that go out, and we're expanding those surveys not only to be inclusive of our students, but expanding the pieces with the staff to make sure that we are looking at social emotional learning supports for the students within our system, but also the adults. So I'll pause right there. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Assemblywoman. Appreciate that. And we have up next Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Chair. I would first just like to echo my colleagues' sentiments regarding these programs related to our retention and recruitment of teachers. And I really look forward to seeing that data breakdown of the metrics that you're expecting to get from these programs to see how these programs are really moving us forward in this particular space. The one piece, though, that I'm not seeing in here is a discussion about like the increased cost of living in Nevada. I understand that it's the educator, the workforce is low across the country, but in Nevada, it's really creating problems with our housing market and our rental market. I know there aren't single teachers out there without roommates or considering roommates because it's just impossible to find a place right now, especially in Northern Nevada. My question, though, is related to E14. And there appear to be at least 3 other work programs that we looked at today related to providing care to children and supporting their families. We know that the earlier we get to children and get them into educational programs, the more successful they are at reading and developing other important skills. But early childhood isn't limited to school-age children, and pre-K is just a component of that larger effort. So we need to ensure that children and families are being supported from time of birth on, right? So as we move forward into recovery, we need to be standing up larger scale and coordinated efforts to address childcare and early childhood education needs for our communities. We have public players such as our schools, but we also have an underrepresented childcare industry that needs attention and support as well. So my question for you is, how does your early childhood education data collection efforts and building the pre-K program efforts work with other agencies who are working in this space as well? Can you talk about that coordinating effort and how you're working to enhance those programs?
Jonathan Moore for the record. Thank you for the question. So currently within our day-to-day work, we partnered with the Department of Welfare Services, childcare, to ensure that we're meeting the needs of families with young children. And that's also part of our data collection. You'll see within one of our proposals is work to significantly develop and support our birth through 3rd grade, or B3 as it's called, initiative. What we do know, right, is the earlier that we can capture our youngest learners and provide a system of support for them and their families, the more successful their trajectory will be. So part of that work that you see in the proposal includes not only alignment with data collection across systems to be able to ensure that the ways in which we're developing our student, or the ways in which we're engaging our students and family, are yielding positive outcomes. We also have a component in there that I'm really excited about, where we're modeling after our digital ambassadors. We want to create a system of our educators and our administrators of our earliest learners. So talking about birth through 3rd grade, so our learners in that continuum, to be able to build their capacity to support not only current educators, but those who may be new or seeking to join that space. So we certainly echo that, and you will find dedicated priorities aligned to the birth through 3rd grade space as well as pre-K.
I would like to just follow up that I really hope that the efforts that are included in this work program, E14 in particular, do enhance the overall state's efforts in this area, and that we really start to define out metrics and how we're going to move really the meter of accessibility to early childhood education for parents. Having being a parent of 3 children, that was our biggest hurdle, was just finding a place to put our kids that didn't bankrupt us. My husband has been a stay-at-home parent for 8 years because we've had a child who was not in the public education system for that long. And it just made financial sense for us to do that. So as we move forward with these programs, and particularly the federal dollars that look to be coming in related to this child care issue in particular, seeing this coordinated effort through our different entities, I really look forward to following up on that and seeing how you guys do it.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Appreciate that. We have up next a question from Senator Settlemyre, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just curious, it seems that some of these programs and projects will require ongoing funding. So I was curious as to how the Department of Education plans to fund these after the federal funds are no longer available.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Most of a majority of the projects do not require additional funds. What I would share, the one that, project that we've been highlighting a lot is the teacher recruitment and retention in that last mile. I think continuing to work with our federal delegation, because again, this is not just a Nevada issue in the pipeline, it is a national issue. And so working on the accessibility to college, the cost of college has increased immensely, and resources such as Pell Grants have not increased at the same rate. So we have a national issue, and what I would say is that that one program, if successful, and we can demonstrate, we bring the data to you that it is successful, and we bring it to the federal government as well, that would continue. But the other projects in building out, unless there's a specific project in here that you would like me to address, we really aren't asking for additional fund support beyond what is allocated.
Thank you. If I could have a follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Please do.
Thank you. So are you indicating then that there will be no need for an additional increase in next biennium's budget in order to sustain any of these programs?
Yeah, in the programs that are here, unless the legislature would like to see components such as the CTE pathway to continue, other pieces where we see that our educational system can benefit from these types of programs. There are just straight up, but during this last legislative session, we as a department would have loved to put forward some additional projects to be able to move our educational system forward. But unfortunately, because of the economic crisis, we did not move that forward. So I believe during the regular budget process, we will do our requests. But for those programs that are in here, we see the immediate benefits that will move us forward. Some of them are long-term, and we will see as we move forward.
I appreciate that. I guess I was trying to look for a more specific answer. What percentage of these are not one-shots? But it seems like I'm not being able to quite get to that. So I'll just have to follow up offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for asking the finance question in the Interim Finance Committee meeting. I want to follow up on Senator Settlemyre's question, though. Specifically, it's E10 and E11 have reoccurring costs associated with them beyond this. They would have annual reoccurring costs. And I think, and if I understood Senator Settlemyre's question, and similar to mine, if that is shown to be successful and valuable and something you wanted to carry forward, would you include that in your budget request moving forward? And that's specifically E10 and E11.
Yeah, so those, actually in E10, I'm going to refer to Deputy Gonzalez because I think there is one piece. Or Deputy Hart, are you prepared to answer that? I think there is, I'm trying to find the specific, I know in E10, but it's not all with all of these programs. I apologize. If you could give me just a moment, or if Deputy Hartz is prepared to answer that question right off the top of her head.
Oh, no problem. And I realize that every budget submission and what makes it into the budget is based on what the revenue and budget picture looks like at that moment in time. So it's kind of hard to answer, but just wanted to know if you had, in your perfect world, if you would intend on including those two things and ongoing costs within your budget.
Heidi Hartz for the record. As the superintendent indicated, many of the projects that have been proposed for funding through our COVID federal relief dollars are one-time in nature because the funds are one-time in nature. So we've really focused on projects that will allow us to invest in a significant way and lay a solid foundation moving forward. For individual projects that may have an ongoing funding need or could benefit our school districts moving forward, we've identified those in the project proposals under the section titled off-ramp. And certainly as we begin to build the biennial budget request, not only for the 2023 legislative session, but also the 2025 legislative session, the department would look at programs and services that are proving to be successful and have a significant improvement in our school districts to determine if they warrant additional funding moving forward. If they do, based on the results of the evaluations that also accompany many of these projects, then the Department of Education would consider recommending those in the agency request budget, which then of course would be subject to recommendation in the governor's recommended budget and ultimately approval by the legislature.
Thank you, Ms. Hartz. That answers my question. Do we have, I believe I have Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson has a question as well.
Thank you so much. And they're specific to item 8 and then a quick one on item 12. So on item 8, this is just going to be a request for information because I know that specific to the dollars that are going to non-public schools, the feds are, they've got their requirement in it here. We have to comply with it. They're setting the parameters in terms of what low income is, 185% of the federal poverty level at 2020. And I know that in other programs, we've had the same requirement as well about a portion of these federal dollars that are specific to non-public schools to help low-income children in those public schools. So just what I'm looking for is an idea of how those dollars have gone out and been spent, if they've been completely utilized, and then where those allocations have gone to, knowing that item 8 is forward-looking. At some point, I'll request the same thing, which is how are these dollars actually falling out to our non-public school education settings, and what do their needs look like with low-income students. So that's kind of data I'll be looking for on 8, and that can be sent offline when the department gets it. Then specific to item number 12, which is the math support specific to algebra. I think my question is probably in the spirit of 10 and 11, the questions that Senator Brooks just asked, which is super excited about this, super excited to see the thought into grades 3 through 7, then 8 through 11, for the support, knowing that our ACT data shows us this is the reason why we probably are trending downwards over time with those results. And this could help in the bigger picture in terms of the academic success of our students. So we know that this is, it looks like a 2-year funding request, but same thing, if this works well, if we see our numbers trend up in math because of these supports, then is there a way for us to do this
in the long run. It doesn't seem like a big chunk of money, but I think it could be very meaningful. So to me, it seems like something that if it works well, we would continue to do. But that's it on 12. Thanks.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And I believe Senator Gokochia has a question as well. Senator Gokochia, did you have a question as well?
No, I don't.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, do we have any further questions from any of the members on items 7 through 16 from the Department of Education?
Chair, I did have a question.
Senator Hammond? Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. Again, it's going back to, we're looking at a bunch of different items. This was a particularly E9 because it's a very large chunk of money, $322 million going into what we believe are some problems we're having because of the pandemic. You had to have been evaluating how you believe the money is going to impact the student learning or improve the achievement gap that was created during the pandemic. If you find out that this is actually working, have you evaluated how much more money you're probably going to need to ask for the next biennium to figure out how to, make sure that there's not a reduction in that spending?
Thank you, Senator Hammond. For the record, Superintendent Ebert. So the $200 million that you strategically placed as a body moving forward will help school districts move that, and that's the planning piece. Also, too, with the Commission on School Funding, reaching optimal funding. We know that we're still looking at additional $2 billion per year to reach optimal funding for the state of Nevada. And so that work is being done by the Commission on School Funding to be able to bring those proposals to you for approval. So those would be the two things that I would note. The $200 million kind of gives that gap, also to the funding that you provided, the increased funding that you provided to school districts this last legislative session, as well as the Commission on School Funding moving forward on how we reach optimal funding for our state.
Thank you.
And did we have any other questions on these items? I think I just heard somebody try to speak up. All right. Okay, well, I do not see any further questions or comments or discussion from the committee on these items. And I really, really appreciate the entire NDE team coming today to help us walk through these items and understand them. I see no further conversation or discussion. I would take a motion to approve items 7 through 16.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
And I have Senator Carlton made that motion, and I had a second from Senator Dennis. Do we have any other discussion, or do we have any discussion on that motion?
Mr. Chair.
Is that Senator Dennis?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on the motion. I appreciate all the work that the department has put forward to try to. They've got a lot of pieces that they're trying to do with all of this funding, and so I think that I appreciate them being able to get this all work done as we move forward. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to make up some things, and also some things just from the past that we're able to move forward. So I appreciate the motion that will help them to continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dennis. Do we have any other discussion on the motion? All right, I see none. So all in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. And any opposed, please raise your hand. And that motion passes unanimously. And those items to approve, items 7 through 16. Thank you very much. And that will take us to our next set of items, our next item, excuse me, which is going to be item 22. And item 22, let me go to it. Is from the Department of Agriculture. And once again, I open up far too many screens, and I'm not exactly sure who we have from the Department of Agriculture with us this morning, but please go ahead and walk us through that.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. For the record, Doug Ferris, Animal Industry Division Administrator for the Department of Agriculture. Also accompanying me here today is Katie Jameson, who is the NDA Fiscal Administrator. The purpose of this work program that we put forward is to request the reinstatement of the operations manager position in the dairy program, which was eliminated during the 2021 session due to concerns of the reserves in that program. NDA does not have any other positions that meet the required experience or expertise of this operations manager position. The operations manager also has specific qualifications that must be met, including licensure and environmental health specialist and experience performing environmental health duties for a regulatory environmental health agency. Proper program management and oversight is vital in carrying out these programs and meeting the state requirements as well as federal regulations that we are bound by. And with that, I can go into further detail if you'd like, Mr. Chair, or I can open it up to questions.
Slight technical difficulties on my end. Sorry about that, Mr. Ferris. Thank you so much. We do have a question. I have Senator Gokachia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You must have been anticipating on the last, that I would have something here with the Department of Ag. Mr. Ferris, I can understand probably the need. And again, I'm a rural representative, but I've been getting inundated with calls over the last week, 10 days, especially about your entry desk and getting livestock permitted and entered into the state, especially down some of that livestock going to the All Indian Finals and the PBR in Las Vegas. So I am sympathetic with your needs, and we need to make sure we've got a supervisor over the dairy fund. Everyone needs to understand this fee is actually on the product, the retailer, rather than the dairy industry, but it is there in place to support the dairy lab. But I guess I want to know, if we give you this position, is it in fact going to free up your animal industry side and your state vet side? It seems to be lacking.
For the record, Doug Ferris, thank you for the question, Senator. Currently, without the dairy operations manager position, that is a duty because the state veterinarian does oversee the dairy program. And next from the state veterinarian is myself. And so this is taking a lot of time out of our state veterinarian's position, as well as mine in overseeing these and trying to comply with all the regulations that we need to meet. So in putting this position back in, this position would still answer to the state veterinarian, but they would be performing duties that the state veterinarian is now trying to currently do while also performing her own job duties or additional job duties such as the entry permits.
I may follow up, Mr. Chair, then, okay, Mr. Ferris, if we give you this position, then I'm going to see a diminished number of phone calls coming to mind. It's really got problematic over the last couple of weeks, and I don't know what's going on. I know it's a busy time of year, but I don't want to see, some of those events like the PBR in Las Vegas being canceled because they can't get they're very upset, I don't mind saying right today, because they couldn't get entry permits. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gocochea. And do we have any other questions? Oh, we have Assemblywoman Titus. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm concerned about it in our comments, how we're, Senator Gocochea commented that this assessment is not on the producers, actually it's on like the middle person. And I'm just concerned, apparently you respond on how you're going to pay for this and indicated that you would recommence the collection of butter, fluid milk and cream assessments, and how that projected that amount of income of 168,000. I'm just wondering what percent is a charge, and is the industry aware that you're going to be charging this, and the people who produce the milk, would it not be the dairymen, but it's now going to be the people who bottle it, or is it going to be at the grocery store chain? And how are those assessments going to be done?
For the record, Deb Ferris, thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. These assessments, they have been in place until 2014, when the Dairy Commission, which has since been dissolved and was taken over by the Department of Agriculture. At that time, the Dairy Commission was experiencing an excess in reserves. So their decision was in 2014, they stopped the butter assessments. And then in 2015, they actually stopped the assessments completely on the fluid milk products. It is paid for by the distributors. So anybody who's distributing milk products and butter, that type of product, is who pays these. We did notify everybody prior to this in May, and in June, we sent out notifications of re-implementing these. And I can say from the dairy program or dairy producers that we did speak with, there was no opposition to it. They just wanted to make sure that we were following and completing all our duties and requirements as a state agency.
If I follow, Mr. Chair, I'm just concerned that no fees are ever absorbed by an industry. They're usually passed down to the consumer. So are we looking at an increase in butter, increase in milk prices? What are we looking at, an increase to the consumer on this?
For the record, Doug Ferris, I understand your statement about that. I know it always goes down to the consumer. So if they decide to pass this on, that could be it is the consumers that are paying it. Like I said, historically they paid it already, and it's the same fee. We didn't increase the fees that they paid back in 14 or 15. We just re-implemented them, and they are relatively. I mean, they're small amounts in the big picture. I guess they're larger amounts depending on it, but it is for butter. It's 1 cent per pound of butter that's distributed, and then for fluid milk and cream, it's 0.0004 cents. Per pound of fluid milk or cream that is distributed throughout the state.
All right, thank you, Senator, for the question. Thank you for your answers, Mr. Fair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. I have a follow-up question to that. It's just, will the agency be able to sustain their current, or not current, sufficient reserve levels in the long term if this position is approved, in addition to reinstating the fees?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, you broke a little bit on my end. I apologize. I missed part of that.
Oh, no problem, Ferris. I just want to know that you'll have sufficient reserve levels will be maintained if you were to add this position and reinstate the fees.
Yes, Mr. Chair, for the record, Deb Ferris, the fees have actually already, they were re-implemented as of fiscal year 22. So July 1 is when we started. Collections have already started coming in. They come at the 20th of the month. So in August, September, and now come in October, we have collected these assessments. So they're already being realized funding into the program. And that is the projections that our fiscal staff did and that we went over, was to make sure that we would be a solvent. This would be a solvent program in still funding this position and collecting those fees. And if you'd like more, I know Katie Jamison can answer more if it's more fiscal oriented.
Yeah, that would be great if available.
Good morning, Chairman Brooks. Katie Jamison for the record. Can you hear me?
Good morning, Ms. Jamison. We can hear you fine.
Okay, good morning. Just to expand upon that question, the reserve levels, what we did to be very, very conservative was we projected them at flat based on actuals the first 6 weeks of collection. And then we added growth to the expenses, and we did a 3-4 year analysis on it to show how solvent we would be. And in fact, our reserve levels show to be over by 200 days in each year of our 45-day required reserve, even projecting it flat. And there will be, growth with these fees as population grows. So we will be very solvent, and that is with the restoration of this position in there.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Ms. Jameson. And I will check with the committee and see if we have any other questions for Ms. Jameson on that piece. Senator Gocochea, please.
Thank you for recognizing me the second time, Mr. Chair. And I guess just a point I want to bring up is, Department of Ag seems to be getting very good at putting regulations in place and collecting fees. And I just want to point out, folks, we need to pick up the service a little bit. So thank you with that.
Thank you, Senator. And do we have any other questions or comments from the committee for either Ms. Ferris or Ms. Jameson? All right, I see none. So I would entertain a motion to approve this item.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I think I have a motion from Vice Chair Carlton, and did I see a second from Senator Gocochea? Thank you, Senator.
Yeah.
And now any discussion on that motion? I see no discussion on the motion, so please all in favor, raise your hand. Right, any opposed? Thank you. And any opposed, please raise your hand. All right, that motion passes unanimously. And we can move on to our next item. Thank you, Administrator Ferris, and thank you very much, Ms. Jameson, for helping us out this morning. And we can move on to item 34. And I just want to let the members know and those who are presenting, it's 12 o'clock right now, and I want to take a couple of items. Take possibly the next two items, and then we will break for a brief lunch because I don't think we're going to be able to power all the way through this today without stopping for a quick break. And we'll take about a 30-minute break after the next two items. So we'll take item 34, 36, and then we'll go to lunch. We have up next item 34, and I believe it's item 34. Let me make sure I'm not skipping anything. Yep. And with us, that's from the Department of Health and Human Services, Aging and Disability Services. And we have Administrator Schmidt with us this morning that will help us walk through that work program. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Brooks, and members of the committee. This is Dina Schmidt, Administrator for Aging and Disability Services Division. This work program transfers $2 million in federal epidemiology and laboratory capacity funds, also known as ELC, to our division. The funds are focused on mitigating cases of COVID-19 as well as exposure to COVID-19. And we will be using these funds for two projects within our division. The first project is related to the expansion of licensed residential beds. During the pandemic, we've seen an increase in acute hospital and nursing home stays due to the lack of availability of community placement options for older adults and people with disabilities. We've been actively working across the department to ensure timely transfer of patients from acute hospitals that continue to be challenged by the lack of available beds. This program will be structured similar to the expansion of the certified community behavioral health clinics that was done by Division of Public and Behavioral Health. It will be through a competitive grant process with funding open to residential facilities for groups and homes for individual residential care. We've been working with the industry to identify the appropriate criteria for these grants, as well as strict outcome measures to ensure that we are increasing the quality and capacity of residential beds available. Grants will be available to currently licensed and new providers looking to increase the number of licensed beds in our states. The second project is a reduction of our wait list for our assistive technology for independent living program. Assistive technology or home modifications are often one-time expenditures that assist people with physical disabilities to stay in their home rather than be moved to an institutional setting. The program has a current wait list of 111 individuals who have physical disabilities and need some type of home modification to remain independent. Providing these one-time expenditures will enable these individuals to remain in their home, avoid potential admission to congregate settings or hospital settings, which could increase their risk of COVID exposure. The program provides technology and adaptive equipment that support independence and reduce the need for individuals to have additional caregiving staff in their homes, thereby also reducing their potential exposure to COVID. These projects would be one-time costs, including but not limited to items such as home modifications, door widening, those types of things, assistive devices for meal preparation, mobility devices, vehicle modifications, as well as communication devices, among some. We really do. I just want to acknowledge and appreciate the collaboration of Lisa Sherrick and Julia Peak and the entire public and behavioral health team who worked with us and their funding partners to identify projects that would reduce the risk of COVID exposure to older Nevadans and people with disabilities. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Schmidt. I appreciate it. I appreciate this work program and everything that's in it. It's wonderful use, especially of one-time funds, to fix some of the things that have been exposed by this COVID-19 issue. I have a handful of questions, and we'll start with Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson, please.
Thank you, Chairman Brooks. I appreciate it. So first of all, I absolutely love this item. I think of all the important work we're doing today. This is one of, from my perspective, one of the best things that we can do, because creating more capacity in the residential homes for groups absolutely does free up our critical care beds that are in the hospital. And when we talk about times when the number of beds available is a critical public conversation and, a critical need, the more we have to move people into safe, supportive placements, especially our medically fragile, our elderly, and our disability, the better, right? So one, I think that this is a great start of money. I think it's a great use of $1 million. A question I'll throw out there rhetorically is, why is it not more when we know such a pent-up demand for more residential home for groups? I could see us easily justifying much more than $1 million in 2 years, $2 million for this kind of project. And I know that when the governor was requesting projects that people would be interested in and need money for, this is something that I put in as, could we please consider more funding for these types of group homes and these types of supports, because they absolutely free up critical care beds and make sure people aren't lingering in hospitals, move them out, have a place to move them to, so that critically ill people have a space in acute care hospitals. So the two pieces to this, since I probably should ask a question as opposed to just being generally supportive of this, is it looks like you were going to do a group home process. I think I heard you say, and as I read the work program information in 34, the owners of the group homes are going to be applying directly to the department. So they'll be coming to you with specific asks about what they need in order to either increase their bed capacity, or I would imagine get another license for another home to increase bed capacity. Is that the way that it's going to work out?
Tina Schmidt, for the record, that is exactly how we anticipate is we would put out a competitive grant. The owners of the facilities would be applying for those funds and outlining exactly the activities that the funding would go towards.
I appreciate that. And I know that when we talk about different kinds of group homes, there are certain sets of group homes that have been problematic, but specific to the group homes for the elderly, those have done phenomenally well. They tend to be very high quality. And so they tend to be a really good investment of our state dollars and also help for families in the community. But when you talk about measuring outcomes, I guess, what would you be looking at to let us know if this program indeed is working or not?
Tina Schmidt, for the record, apologize. So we have been working with the industry to try to get a sense of exactly how we would measure outcomes. One of the things, obviously, the basic focus is going to be the number of beds increased. But we will also be working with healthcare quality and compliance and ensuring compliance and quality of care for those beds that are created. And I agree, I think we will be looking at their licensure status, their history, any information that we can get as we evaluate those grants. It will be competitive. So we are focused on increasing quality as well as capacity with these funds.
I appreciate that. If I could segue just real quickly, this past session, we authorized funding to the department to modernize and streamline the application process for the individuals who are applying for financial assistance with living in some of these residential homes for groups for elderly and medically fragile. Just could you give us an update about how that is going and how that project's coming along?
Tina Schmidt, for the record. So if you recall, those funds for that streamlined project were in the Division of Welfare and Supportive Services budget. And we have been having meetings with them to get a kickoff, but at this point, we're still in the process of developing and looking at the RFP process and what route we're going to go. And I apologize, I wasn't expecting that question, so I don't have too much information other than we are working on it, but I don't have a timeline, but happy to follow up with you offline and get that information to you.
No, and I appreciate that because I think it speaks to the complexity of what it takes to qualify to help this population, that someone has to have an immediate need and be able to demonstrate that they are at threat of being admitted to a nursing home because they are medically fragile or because they need so many supports and they want to continue to live at home. So from the time that person might apply, you've got an application that goes through the Division of Welfare, then it goes through aging. You've got a couple of big organizations involved. And so I think that was the goal of those dollars, was to help streamline so that people could move through multiple departments at a better rate than what it's been taking us. So we can get those, increase our number of beds, then hopefully and smooth out that process for the people to get into the beds, and then we'll have a great fix. I'm excited about where we'll be in a year from now.
Thank you for the comment. And up next, I have Assemblywoman Miller, if you still have a question.
Yes, Chair Brooks, thank you for that. Administrator Schmidt, my question is directly about the incubator grants, and what do you anticipate will be the increase of the number of the actual number of the residential settings of available beds here in the state? And also, would those be, for my notes, it's unclear, would those be permanent? So I know this may just be one-time funding, but would those, the increased capacity be available in Nevada after the grant period?
Tina Schmidt, for the record, yes, that would be the intent. We would fund agencies to increase their capacity or open, let's just say, a new home that would serve maybe 4 more people. Obviously, at some point, the grant funding, once the grant funding the project is completed, it's really up to that group home owner to continue to offer that service. And we don't have any way to control that beyond the grant funding, if that makes sense. But we would look at, we were hopeful that most of these providers are in this. This is their industry and their business, and many of them, especially our really good ones, want to grow their capacity, but they struggle with some of the one-time expenditures that are needed in a home, and so this is a way to kind of support those who have been serving people already, to support and increase, the ability to serve more people in our state.
Follow-up, Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So because, another very real issue that was pre-COVID or exempt of COVID is our aging population and the fact that people are living longer, and so that the increased need with that. So you're actually saying that some of this will be able to assist with people with these small group and small residential settings for them to actually obtain their licensure in order to, be legally and officially licensed to do so?
Tina Schmidt, for the record, that is correct. Yeah, our hope is that if there's folks out there who have been trying to get licensed, or possibly those that have been, operating, and this would give them the money they need to do modifications that they need to meet licensure requirements. That would be one option. It would be build new buildings, it could do beds, it could do a single, or it could be home modifications for licensure purposes.
And $1 million is enough for all that? Or $2 million?
Yeah, Dina Schmidt, for the record, and to your point, yes, I am grateful for the $1 million. I did also, as an agency, we also submitted this request to ARPA funds. So there's an opportunity there again, but we were just grateful for this opportunity, and our partners over at Public and Behavioral Health, who had this large grant and reached out to sister agencies to see if there were things that we could do. And so it's a start. And hopefully we will be successful and have an opportunity to add money to this project.
Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And do we have any other questions on this item from from our committee? I have a question. I just want to make sure I give other members an opportunity. And seeing none, my question is around the assistive technology services, and some of this money is going to go to clear up that wait list, or eliminate or reduce that wait list. And I just want to understand what the primary factors contributing to that ongoing wait list are in that particular program.
So Dina Schmidt, for the record, and I do have with me Jeff Duncan, our chief of our planning and advocacy group, and he might have to help me fill in a little bit here. So the program is limited, has limited amount of funding, is one reason we often have a wait list. Supplies, obviously, sometimes depending on the request that people need, it could be a very expensive home modification. We may not be able to get the supplies that they need for that project, could add to it, but I'll let Jeff jump in if there's anything. I see him nodding, so I think he agrees, but is there anything else you need to add, Jeff?
Thank you, Dina. This is Jeff Duncan, for the record. That would be absolutely correct. The limited funding that we have currently, and then the ongoing supply costs is definitely a concern through COVID. Lack of supplies has definitely expanded our wait time for services.
Thank you. And do we have any questions from the committee? It does not look like we do. So thank you very much, Administrator Schmidt, and thank you for that answer, Mr. Duncan. And with that, we can move on to a motion. And I would like to entertain a motion to approve this item.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Me.
Second.
So I have a motion from a competing motion from Assembly, or not competing for the motion from Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson, and I think she beat you to the punch, Vice Chair Carlton. And we have a second from Senator Dennis.
It won't be the first or the last time, so I'm perfectly fine with that.
She's very excited about this item. So do we have any discussion on that motion? I see no discussion on the motion, so we can please, all the members in favor, raise your hand. All right, thank you. Any members opposed, please raise your hand. All right, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. And we can move on to last item before lunch is item 36. And that is from the Department of Health and Human Services, Healthcare Financing Policy, Healthcare and Policy Administration. And that work program is to implement Senate Bill 420. And I would just like to remind the presenters and remind the members of the committee that we aren't necessarily here to debate the merits of the policy, or this is a bill that had passed, and I just really want to make sure that we make sure that the expenditure that we are looking to approve today is in compliance with the statute. And that it is the correct amounts and is being done correctly. And so with us today, we have Deputy Administrator Burrell and Deputy Administrator Capurro, and we have Dwayne Young from the Governor's Office. And so whoever wants to go first, Mr. Young, if you'd like to go ahead and just give us a very brief understanding of where we're at in the process, and just to make sure that this expenditure for this piece of implementation for Senate Bill 420 is correct.
Good morning, Chair Brooks and Vice Chair Carlton and the committee. I'm Dwayne Young. I'm the Policy Director for the Office of the Governor. I first want to address the anomaly. It's not normal that the Governor's Office represents agencies and work programs. However, we are doing so today for two reasons. One, to show our commitment to all stakeholders to stay engaged in this process, and two, to support state agencies who are required to implement the tenets of the law. With that said, with me today also is Susan Brown from the Governor's Finance Office, who can assist in answering any specifics or mechanics of the work program. This work program is requested through the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy. Is a request to transfer funds from the Public Option Trust Fund for both staffing and contractual costs. The contractual costs include assistance with the development of the needed waiver and actuarial analysis of the impact of the public option for the market for healthcare and insurance and risk pools analysis. This fiscal note for SB 420 contained in total 5 positions. However, this work program is only addressing the contract and 1 position for the Chief 3, who will set the foreground for this work. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Young. I appreciate that. And it does appear as if this is completely in alignment with the fiscal note that was submitted by the agency during the session. Any questions for Mr. Young? All right, Assemblywoman Hadagi.
Hi, sorry, my internet's a little choppy, so I wasn't sure if you called on me or not.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, and if I cut out, I apologize too. I'm having some unstable internet issues over here. And I just had a quick question, Chair. I just wanted to ask really quick, because it's something that I usually ask when we hire companies to fulfill these projects. Is this a Nevada-based company that was hired? Health Strategies?
Dwayne Young, for the record, no, they are a nationally based company.
They are, I'm sorry.
They are a nationally based company. They are nationwide, but they do not have any specific offices in Nevada.
Okay, and then just one other question. Was there an RFP put out for it?
Again, Dwayne Young, for the record, the prescription of 420 actually circumvents the process of a normal RFP, and so there was no RFP put out or required as the bill goes around the purchasing process.
Okay, that was it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Hadagi. And do we have any other questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman, I do have some aimed at the fiscal side, if I may.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Carlton, please go ahead.
Thank you. So in a couple of different sections, there were monies allocated associated with those sections. And I believe we're fairly consistent with the fiscal notes that were submitted. So that's a good thing. What I'm trying to figure out here is the money that's being asked for here will be for the actuarial study and to begin the process of implementation. There was money set aside for the study and there's money set aside for the implementation. And when I look at the dollars that you're requesting now, it seems as though the actuarial study dollars are encapsulated in this. And I missed a little bit of your statement, Mr. Young. My internet's been going in and out on me. So what I'm wondering is there was another $500,000 set aside to go through, I believe it was to go through SHIX and come to you to do this. Will that $500,000 still be needed, or is the study pretty much taken care of with the dollars you're requesting here today? Did that make any sense? I hope so.
Dwayne Young for the record, makes perfect sense. And this is some confusion. And so I'm thankful for the opportunity to clarify this on the record. The second actuarial study and the $500,000 that is contained within the fiscal note will actually come later in the process. And so to answer your question, yes, we believe it will be needed, but if there is, we know with this process, there are several guardrails within this bill and several, if this, then this takes place. And so if there were to be, information identified in earlier sections or feedback, because that specific actuarial analysis actually focuses on the exchange and the portion of the public option in section 16.5 of the bill that looks at a specific entities offering exchange-based programs for individuals who have not yet qualified for insurance through their employer or have been released by their employer and operates almost as like COBRA-like plan. And so there are some correspondence with the federal government about what that looks like, but that separate set of funds was set aside for that. And then I believe it is earmarked in for the next biennium. And so we would have an opportunity to come back during the legislative session or at another IFC in the future if the health exchange felt that that portion wasn't needed based on the work that Medicaid has done out of this first actuarial study.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are still doing, and I think that's where some folks are getting confused. We still are doing an actuarial study to look at the market, do some market analysis to be able to have input from all the different stakeholders and agencies that will be involved. So that's one component. Then the discussion and implementation and getting prepared to submit a waiver, and then possibly another study for SHIX on the back end, depending upon where we end up. Did I break that down fairly correctly?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. And there's been some confusion, and I apologize. We got this quick, and I just want to make sure that when people call, I give them the correct answer. And just one last question. So staff was wonderful enough to put down kind of a timeline for us, which is very helpful for me. And it talks about hosting different design sessions with stakeholders and agencies. I'm sure you probably heard public comment this morning, and you've probably had folks reach out to you who want to be involved. So if you could kind of just give us a feel for what those will look like. We did not get the chance to have that conversation in session. So if you could elaborate on that so that those folks who are interested kind of know the lay of the land moving forward, how you're going to do this.
Certainly, and Dwayne Young, again, for the record, that is the reason why I'm here today. I have taken several meetings, Chief of Staff Cancella, many people have reached out to the governor, and it is to make clear that the governor's mission is to be innovative in healthcare, but to also be smart in its approach. And so we know that this bill, many people did not feel that it got the robust discussion that it needed, but we also know that there are many appropriate guardrails and possible 2 other bienniums and 2 other legislative sessions to continue this discussion and see where we're needed. But as part of this most immediate process, the agency has committed to continuing those conversations that have certainly started here in my office and translate it to them with the stakeholders, as well as with the contractor actually having 6 engagement sessions that are planned outside of the project kickoff. In those engagement sessions, there will be an opportunity. As you know, the Department of Health and Human Services has 1 actuarial economist, and so to throw all this on them would just be impossible. And so I know that many of those stakeholders want to engage their own actuaries, and it would be inappropriate to do that with this contracted vendor because that's what they're there for. And so to have those discussions, and so certainly this office and the agency has always been committed to having discussions and making sure that people feel that they have a seat at the table. And as part of this contract are those 6 sessions.
Okay, and thank you very much, Mr. Young. I appreciate it. Healthcare in this state is a very fine balancing act. We've got to the point where our uninsured rate hopefully will get back to the single digits again once we get where we're going. It's been under stress for the last couple of years through no fault of its own. A pandemic will do that to the healthcare system. And we just want to be very careful moving forward that that's one of the most important things folks look at with their jobs and being able to take care of their families, and want to make sure everyone has a seat at the table and we have a thorough conversation about making sure people can get health care. And if this is a path forward, that's great. I just want to make sure that we analyze it really well. So thank you very much for being here and explaining all this and walking through the different fiscal components of it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And thank you, Mr. Young. I think that was some of the confusion and some of the folks I talked to as well is how the listening sessions and the collaboration and input from stakeholders, how that would be facilitated, and it's going to be facilitated by this contractor. And so we have to put the contractor in place, or this vendor, excuse me, put in place, and then we can begin some of those formalized conversations with stakeholders. Thank you very much. I think I have a question as well from Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Thank you so much, Chairman. I appreciate the question. The first one that I had was just based on the stakeholder meetings and agencies. It looks like that's scheduled to happen October through November 2021. And I'm wondering if those are going to be public or open to the public, if those will be, I imagine a lot of us probably have interest in what the contents of those meetings and what's being discussed through them. So do you imagine them being kind of public in an open meeting law kind of a way?
Again, Dwayne Young for the record, but I don't believe that they will be specifically bound by open meeting. It is the intent of this office and the agency to have open and transparent discussions. So yes, those will be open.
Okay. So there'll be, I guess the biggest thing is there'll be somehow we'll know the date. The date and location will be public. So if people wanted to whoever wants to participate in that, some stakeholder meetings are public, some aren't. And so I was just kind of wondering, so I know which road we're walking down.
Dwayne Young for the record, yes, the agency has a public information officer who will make that information available.
Okay, all right. The other thing I had is because I'm looking at the submitted work program information. And so I see that there's kind of 2 pieces of that 2 times in 2 different years where we're spending money dealing with the actuarial. And so I just wanted to make sure I had a good understanding of what the work products were going to be for those. So we've got in 2023, the $500,000 for the impact of public option on market for healthcare insurance and risk pool analysis. And that's a one-time, but then also in 2025, an actuarial rate review and the negotiation. So can you tell me what we would expect to see, I guess, out of the 2023 funding and then out of the 2025 funding?
Certainly, Dwayne Young for the record, as I addressed in Chairwoman Carlson's question, the 2023 product is to produce the study of the impacts on the market and is based through Medicaid. The second actuarial study is dealing specifically with that section 16.5 that looks to offer a public plan for those that are within trade organizations that are either newly hired and have not reached insurance or have been terminated or laid off and do not have insurance coverage, and what that would look like. All 1332 waivers, which is what's part of the initial submission through Medicaid, require actuarial analysis. They require this process. And so that is a requirement of CMS. The second portion, to understand what that would do, one, to the specific health market, how that would interact with the 1332 waiver, and how that would impact both the exchange market then requires a separate actuarial analysis that takes into effect the first actuarial analysis. So they're two separate work products, but they're both intrinsically linked. And this is what I was referring to when I talk about the guardrails that are within this bill that allowed, first, we study this effect on Nevada and its current market, but then secondly, we look at the second options that presented with the bill, and we study what those impacts might have on the existing market and what we've looked at within the first actuarial analysis.
Thank you so much. And so then the contract with Manat Health will cover the multi-year work on this.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Do we have any other, questions from the committee? I see Assemblyman Roberts has a question, and then Senator Severs-Gansert has a question.
Thank you, Chair. I think I know the answer. I just want to ask again because I think Vice Chair kind of covered this, and but I'm just curious that during public comment, the folks that were requesting to be part of the process moving forward, this bill and the RFP, the intent of your division is to allow those folks the opportunity to participate in this moving forward, correct?
Dwayne Young for the record, and I want to make sure that I'm understanding the question. But I think there has been some concern that a process was skipped. During the session, the bill, as it was written, passed by this body and signed by the governor, allowed for not the normal purchasing processes. Even through the normal purchasing processes, there's a chance to read the RFPs or view that, but there is really not a part for stakeholders to weigh in on that part of the process. This was approved at last week's BOE meeting, and so there was an opportunity there for stakeholders to comment on the contract itself. So there's an opportunity, as I've stated previously, for people to come to the table as part of this process, but the opportunity to comment on the actual selection of the vendor of the RFP occurred during that process in which the bill was debated during session, which had an allowance to go outside of the normal purchasing process.
My apologies, Mr. Chair and Director, is that really wasn't my question. My question was, will this RFP process? So we're going to approve the RFP, right? You're going to move forward. Is the contract going to contain an opportunity for those folks that talked in public comment this morning? This will facilitate their ability to be part of the process, and it will be public to the majority leader's point as well, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thanks. That's all I wanted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblyman. And Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thanks, Chair. Just sort of following up on some of the other questions. As far as this public process and the outreach, how are you going about notifying potential vendors how they can participate? Because now we have a timeline for these, I believe it was 6 meetings, but I'm not sure if we're aware of exactly how you're contacting potential vendors or how you're notifying them, because this process seems to be outside of our normal purchasing and RFP process. I keep using the same word, but the process is really different because it's been exempted is what it looks like. And so how are the notifications going out?
Dwayne Young for the record. So what I will say is that Medicaid handles public workshops and hearings on a monthly basis. They have infrastructure to push that information out. I'm sure there, as part of the contract, there's engagement. So they will use every resource available to notify individuals of their participation. I will also say that every one of those stakeholders that testified have my phone number, and I am sure that they will contact me if they miss a session.
Thank you. And then, I was just looking at section 20 of the bill that talks about the bill exempted rules and policies governing the public option from provisions governing notice and comment rulemaking. So notice and comment rulemaking, I just want you, could you just talk about that just a little bit? Because we're going to spend quite a bit of money, given that this bill passed it, at some point in time. And so we're exempting from the notice and comment rulemaking. So can you explain that to me?
Senator, that's not the bill sponsor, and that's not.
Okay. It's just really outside of all the processes we normally have. And that in particular is extremely unusual. So thank you.
Do we have any questions for the agency or for the governor's office on this particular work program to move the money to pay for the vendor that was just approved at the Board of Exam? All right, Senator Canizara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make sure that we were clarifying a couple of things. And I want to thank Mr. Young for all of his time today in helping to walk through the questions for everyone. And certainly want to thank the Department of Health and Human Services for all of their hard work on getting this contract approved. And I think that Mr. Young highlighted a couple of things, but I first wanted to just say thank you for everyone's work on this so that we have this contract that has been approved by the Board of Examiners. But I want to clarify the contract, and Mr. Young, you can correct me if I am wrong, but the contract actually does provide for, I want to say it was 6 different stakeholder meetings. It is part of the contract that was signed. So that is something that, as far as the comments that we heard about stakeholder engagement and public participation, that is actually provided for within the very terms of the contract. That's a correct understanding? Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And I wanted to just clarify that piece of it. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And I think from what we're hearing is that there will be notice given to anyone who has been interested in this bill to actually participate in those as provided for in that particular contract. And I appreciate that because I do think that does comply with the intent of Senate Bill 420 and what we were trying to accomplish, which was allowing for enough time in this bill and requiring the actuarial analysis, which is also required with respect to the waivers, to allow for this process to take place so that we're really taking a look at what is feasible and what makes sense in implementing this. And so I appreciate that because I do think that is in direct alignment with what the bill provided for and with what the intent was in sort of bringing the bill. And then, and I know you touched on this, and I just wanted to again reiterate that there is a separate section in section 16 that is not this particular actuary study, and that is separate from what is being done with respect to this particular actuarial study. And that's where we keep talking about the $500,000. I think that's all. I think you kind of handled the rest of the things that I wanted to just make sure were clarified in any questions that I had. But again, just thank you for your time.
Thank you. And do we have any questions on this particular item, what's being requested here in this work program? All right, I do not see any further. And so thank you. Thank you, Mr. Young and Administrator, Deputy Administrator Burrell, Deputy Administrator Capuro, for being available today and helping us understand what this work program is. And so with that, I would entertain a motion to pass this item 36, to approve this item, item 36.
Move, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, I've got a motion from Senator Dennis.
I couldn't get unmuted. Go for it.
Oh, okay. Do I have a second from Vice Chair Carlton?
No. I'll let Senator Canizaro second it. That's her privilege.
that case, I'll have I would like to have a second from the other house.
Sorry about that. I'll go ahead and second it then. I just wanted to give the senator an opportunity.
Thank you. There's a little confusion on Zoom screens this morning, and I apologize. So I have a motion from Senator Dennis, a second from Vice Chair Canizaro, and any discussion on that motion? Vice Chair Carlton, excuse me, not Vice Chair Canizaro. It's close to lunch, as you might be able to tell. So I have a motion and a second and discussion. I have Senator Gocochea. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will support the vote in the motion. However, I've still got some real apprehension about the program. I'm waiting to see what the final product looks like.
Appreciate that, Senator Gocochea. And do we have any other comments on the motion? I have Senator Sievers-Ganser. Please go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. And I think it's important to recognize that we want to make sure everyone, all Nevadans have health care. But in looking at this, we're starting off exempting the contracts from the normal process as far as RFPs and so forth. And I really think, given the potential magnitude of this program, we need to be following the procedures that we have over the years, and there's a reason we have those in place. So I'm not going to be supporting this because I think we're starting off the wrong direction, and this legislation exempts the process from the normal way that we bid contracts out, and I want to make sure that it's also a very open process. And we've had some discussion about that, but my understanding is to date it hasn't been that open, and so we want to make sure that it's open moving forward. And I really think we should be using the processes that we've established over the years to make sure that the money that's spent on this is done appropriately and has accountability and as effective as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Do we have any other conversation, discussion on the motion? All right, I see none. So with that, if any of them, all the members who approve and are in favor of approving this motion, please raise your hand. All right, and all of those who are opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, and for clarity, I'm going to list off just to make sure I capture all the opposed. Again, I have to try to get everybody on my screen, please. So I have Senator Settlemyre, Assemblyman Roberts, Assemblywoman Tolles, Assemblywoman Titus, Assemblyman Hafen, Senator Sievers-Ganser, Senator Hammond, Assemblyman Levitt, and if I didn't already mention Assemblywoman Titus are opposed. Is that correct? Did I miss anyone? And were you able to capture that, Mr. Thorley and Ms. Kaufman?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so that's clear for the record. So the motion passes with affirmative votes and with the majority of the affirmative votes. And we can move on to our next item. And our next item is lunch. And so if we could, it looks like it's 12:42, and if we could keep it brief just so that we don't keep everyone, if we could make sure that we are back in our seats, our cameras are on, and we are ready to rock and roll by 30 minutes from now, which would be 12 minutes after the hour. If we could do that, I would really appreciate it. So I'll see everyone back here at 1:12, cameras on, ready to finish our agenda for the day.